At 31, I finally reached a turning point with my misunderstanding husband. We had been married for 3 years, having initially met as colleagues before tying the knot. When we got married, I left my job, which was a common practice in our countryside community. Although the tradition felt restrictive, it was a significant factor in my decision to resign. My previous workplace was a small, somewhat insular company with a notably old-fashioned ethos reflecting its local roots. In that environment, it was nearly unthinkable for a married couple to continue working together, especially given the prevailing attitude that married women should not hold full-time jobs. This societal norm, coupled with the company's outdated views, made it clear that my role there was no longer sustainable. At my new job, I was treated like little more than an intern, while my husband remained in the same department as before. My responsibilities were limited to menial tasks such as making coffee, photocopying, and cleaning. Work that, while not inherently demeaning, was disproportionately assigned to me. It seemed like a deliberate attempt to push me out, as even the actual trainees weren't relegated to such monotonous duties all day. Discussing the issue with my husband proved futile. It was unclear whether he was even listening or simply avoiding the topic, perhaps because he feared that if I became a stay-at-home wife, we'd lose our financial flexibility. One day, my mother called to suggest I reach out to my cousin after hearing about my frustrations at work. She had discussed my situation with various relatives and acquaintances, and as a result, my cousin connected me with a job opportunity. A company where one of his classmates worked was hiring, and they believed my experience would be valuable, so he encouraged me to interview. I was fortunate enough to land the job, and I shared the exciting news with everyone. However, my husband's reaction was oddly muted. Though I found this strange, his lack of objection led me to go ahead and resign. My resignation was promptly accepted. They had clearly been expecting it. My colleagues, who had been gossiping about me, bid me farewell with insincere cheerfulness. "We'll miss you. Let's go out for drinks sometime. Feel free to reach out anytime." I couldn't help but wonder which of them truly meant it. My new job is located in the neighboring city, which, though smaller than a major metropolitan area, boasts an office district with a distinctly urban feel. Upon joining, I discovered that the company's culture was refreshingly modern. There was no bias based on age or gender, and the diverse workforce included several international employees. The company embraced equality, including fair pay, regardless of marital status. My salary has significantly increased compared to my previous job, to the point where I now earn nearly $10,000 more per year than my husband. This is likely due to the absence of gender discrimination. Both men and women receive equal pay for the same work. I haven't shared this with my husband yet, as I suspect he might have difficulty accepting it given his personality and the norms at my former workplace. My dissatisfaction with the workplace vanished, and I found myself genuinely fulfilled in my new role. However, not everything is perfect. My husband contributes nothing to housework, leaving me to handle everything on my own. Balancing full-time work with managing household chores for two people is incredibly draining. I leave for work earlier than he does and come home quite late, yet he never takes on any household responsibilities. Instead, he spends his time snacking and lounging on the couch, leaving the house messier each day. When I return, I'm greeted with requests like, "I'm hungry. Hurry up and make dinner," or similar demands for food, a bath, or coffee. Just hearing these requests is exhausting. Although I chose to work, and I suppose this situation is partly my responsibility, I now realize I might have been influenced by outdated notions and expectations at the time. Since we got married, my husband has repeatedly insisted on his own correctness while highlighting my shortcomings. He would say things like, "Work is tough because you lack the ability. If you want to manage both work and home, you need to try harder. If housework isn't going well, it's because you're inefficient. Get used to it and improve quickly. And since he chose to work, don't slack off on housework." These criticisms were a constant refrain. In rural areas, it's more common for men not to participate in housework compared to urban settings. Most of the married women I knew handled all household chores themselves, with some even managing childcare, caregiving, and farming. This environment led my husband to make me feel that it was natural for me to take on all the domestic responsibilities. Both my mother and mother-in-law were stay-at-home moms, and many women of my generation were either housewives or worked part-time. Despite being a full-time employee, I may have grown numb to the situation, simply accepting my husband's expectations and continuing with the housework as he dictated. Although my husband never explicitly told me to quit my job, I was determined to keep working even if he had. I convinced myself that since I was committed to my career, I couldn't neglect the housework. This routine persisted for a while. Even after I switched jobs, my husband remained in a bad mood when I came home after working late. I would apologize, prepare his dinner, and then rush through the housework, often barely having time to eat my own meal. One day, however, something changed. My husband found my wage statement, which I had carelessly left in a drawer. He stared at it in silence, and despite my attempts to downplay it by saying things like, "It's just because of overtime this time," or "maybe you'll earn more than me soon," my words had no effect. After that incident, my husband ignored me for days. He refused to speak or even look at me when I tried to communicate. Even if I stumbled or made a noise, he would completely ignore it. Eventually, I stopped attempting to engage with him, and just as I adjusted to this silent routine, he abruptly broke his silence. One evening, as I entered the living room after coming home, he shouted, "I'm home. What time do you think it is?" At my current job, there's a core time everyone is expected to be present, but the exact hours for arriving and leaving aren't strictly enforced, leading to varying departure times. Despite my efforts to start early and explaining my situation to my boss, I sometimes got home after 9 p.m. I would prepare ready-made or frozen meals that only needed reheating, yet my husband insisted on waiting for me to serve him. "You shouldn't slack off on housework. The only reason you can keep working is because I allow it," he would yell at me while I hurriedly prepared dinner. His intimidation was palpable throughout the entire exchange. "You're just going to skip cleaning and laundry and go to bed, making excuses that it's too late. You're coming home late on purpose to slack off." Even when I got home late, I diligently took care of the quieter housework tasks. Despite my efforts, the results were far from perfect, and I often felt I deserved the scolding I received. I blamed myself, accepting the criticism as warranted. "Monica, are you listening? Don't get too full of yourself just because you're working," he would say. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it that way. I'm grateful for the opportunity to work. I'll try not to take it for granted." I genuinely believed this at the time. Perhaps I was led to believe it. To manage my workload, I took on extra weekend shifts to cut down on weekday overtime. I vacuumed and did laundry daily, trying my hardest to keep up with the household chores. A few months later, I had an epiphany. Why am I struggling so much on my own? The realization came after seeing a colleague's lunchbox. Her husband was responsible for cooking at their house and even prepared her lunch. I was taken aback, but my other colleagues seemed unfazed. They expressed envy but also remarked how normal it was to share household responsibilities when both partners worked. I couldn't bring myself to share my situation, as none of them appeared to be handling all the housework alone. When I casually asked relatives and friends about their household arrangements, I was astonished to find that none of their husbands did as little as mine. This realization led me to stop handling his share of the housework. I no longer cleaned his room or did his laundry, and I only prepared and heated food for myself. His yelling didn't bother me. I felt a healthy adult should be able to take care of themselves. I left for work much earlier than he did and returned home quite late. Why should I be burdened with household chores long after he had gone to bed? It wasn't fair for me to do all the housework. Even if he ranted about housework being a woman's job or a wife's duty, I ignored him and focused on eating. "So now you think you're something special just because you're earning a bit more money?" he exclaimed before storming out of the house. As I watched him leave, my heart felt cold. His focus on money and the insults he hurled at me made me realize that all my care and effort had been in vain. I couldn't endure it any longer. The next day, he stopped coming home. I assumed he would reach out if there was an issue, so I left the situation alone, only to find out he had moved back in with his parents. Whenever he returned to collect his things, we would have brief and tense discussions. Each time, he resorted to abuse and even shoved me a few times. It was supposed to be a final chance for us, but it felt futile. I was willing to consider rebuilding our relationship if he showed any willingness to compromise, but his actions made it clear that was impossible. Having made my decision, I began the process of filing for divorce. First, I casually brought it up with my mother during one of our regular conversations. She was very supportive, telling me that I had been patient enough and that the decision was long overdue. Next, I reached out to my mother-in-law on a weekend when my husband wasn't around. Although we didn't see each other often, she had always been kind and caring. She was initially surprised by my decision to consider divorce but assured me she would support me. After these discussions, I visited a lawyer to start the formal process. I presented evidence of my husband's behavior, including a timeline of events, my personal diary, photos of bruises from when he had shoved me, and recordings of his verbal abuse. The lawyer noted that while it was a borderline case for domestic violence liability, the evidence was substantial and worth pursuing. I decided to forgo dividing our assets in exchange for not asking for alimony. I rented a room near my workplace and began packing my things. On moving day, I confronted my husband to settle our affairs. He had been buying meals from the supermarket and coming home daily as he didn't want to inconvenience his parents. When I told him we needed to talk, he gave me the usual silent treatment. I wasn't deterred and said what I needed to. "We're getting a divorce. I'm moving out now. Please contact my lawyer." I left my lawyer's business card on the table, but he didn't even glance at it. He seemed to believe that by ignoring me, I would eventually beg for forgiveness. I left the house for good. Strangely, my husband continued to contact me afterward with messages unrelated to the divorce, such as asking to have a meal together or suggesting we go for a drive while shopping. When I ignored his messages, he sent even more desperate emails, accusing me of being stubborn and insisting he would forgive me if I came back and apologized. At the lawyer's office, he exuded overconfidence, expecting me to be the one in trouble and to break down in tears. With a smirk, he signed the divorce papers, treating the whole situation as if it were a mere formality. I quickly gathered the papers, anxious that he might change his mind and tear them up, and submitted them to the courthouse that same day. Later, my lawyer informed me that my husband hadn't believed I would actually follow through with the divorce. Once he realized I was serious, he started demanding alimony and a division of assets, but communication ceased shortly afterward. I suspect my mother-in-law might have intervened and scolded him to stop. Even after the divorce, I continued receiving bizarre emails from my ex-husband, which I chose to ignore. However, I unexpectedly ran into him one day while dining at a shopping center with friends from school. He was there with his colleagues who were former colleagues of mine, so I knew them all. The encounter was awkward for everyone. They managed to steer him away from our table. My friends, who had only met my ex-husband once at our wedding, found his presence unsettling. "That's my recently separated ex-husband. He's been following me around, and it's causing me distress," I explained to them. When I mentioned this to my friends, they approached his table and, as they walked by, they said, "He's a stalker." "That's terrible. So creepy." My ex-husband, who was already uncomfortable around women, quickly retreated from the scene. After that encounter, the delusional emails from him ceased, and I've been enjoying my peaceful life on my own. Hello, I looked in my wallet and couldn't find my credit card. Do you know anything about it? Oh, you noticed already. I thought it might take you a bit longer, considering your age. Wait a minute. Are you saying you're the one who spent $50,000 without permission? That's outrageous. It's not as bad as it sounds. It was just for my wife's birthday. I borrowed the card to book a stay in an ultra-luxurious 5-star hotel suite. It costs about $110,000 a night, and we stayed for 5 nights. It was an amazing experience. I'm even thinking of going to another country next. See you later. Hold on a second. I haven't spoken to my son in 30 years. I raised my 2 boys on my own after divorcing my husband. My younger son has always been there for me, but my older son is a different story. Recently, he came to the house, took my credit card from my wallet, and spent $50,000 at a luxury hotel. His actions are both criminal and heartless. I supported him through everything, but now I can't even think of him as my son. 2 minutes later, I made a decision and called his wife. "Hello, my son is there, isn't he? I've contacted the card company and had the credit card stopped. I'm also planning to report the theft and unauthorized use to the police." After ending the call, I blocked their numbers. I can only imagine their panic and confusion now that the card is stopped. They were planning to travel to another country, so they likely don't have return tickets. They're going to face some serious trouble. A week later, they had no choice but to apologize. I'm a 65-year-old woman living alone in New York. Since divorcing my husband 30 years ago, I've raised my 2 sons by myself. I'm retired now and enjoying my leisure time. "Mom, I bought your favorite donuts," my younger son said when he visited. Thank you, you didn't have to go out of your way, I replied. My younger son often visits even after moving out. He works for a company with good benefits and can get home on time. He's single, so he stays over if the next day is a day off. It's not that he hasn't become independent, he just worries about me living alone. I can manage on my own, but I appreciate his thoughtfulness. On the other hand, when my eldest son and his wife visit our family home, things never go well. I don't really welcome their visits. Hey, can you lend me some money? We have our wedding anniversary coming up next week, and we're planning a trip abroad. We need some extra funds, my eldest son asked. Why don't you use your own savings if you need money? I suggested. I can't save anything with my salary, he complained. You live in a nice new apartment and just bought a new car. Isn't that the result of your own choices? I pointed out. Please, I'll pay you back. Don't be so harsh, he pleaded. Ever since my eldest son started living on his own after graduating from high school, he's often borrowed money from me. After he got married, the amounts he asked for only increased, and I can't recall a single time when he actually repaid any of it. I don't want to lend money to someone who doesn't keep their promises, even if they're family. Shouldn't people honor their commitments? I didn't raise him to disregard such basic values, but he's grown into someone who relies too heavily on his parents' wallet. Fortunately, I received a substantial amount from my retirement fund and have been investing wisely, so I'm not struggling financially. However, I want to avoid unnecessary spending as I consider my future. Yet, as a mother, I find it hard to say no when my son is truly in need. I think I should be stricter, but every time he asks, I end up giving in. Then one day, my eldest son and his wife showed up unexpectedly. We need to talk, he said, his tone serious. I got into a car accident, and we need a substantial amount of money. We don't have much savings, but we've been told we'll be sued if we don't pay. A car accident? I was shocked. I've been working hard to repay a large debt to you, and I guess I was too tired, he explained. Hearing about the accident, I felt a mix of surprise and relief that they were both safe. Maybe my demands for repayment had stressed them out. While I wasn't directly to blame, I couldn't help but feel somewhat responsible. Up until now, they had asked for money for their own needs, but this situation was different. This was an emergency, and there seemed to be no other option. Okay, I'll prepare the money. How much do you need? I asked. $30,000, he replied. What? I was shocked at the enormous amount. $30,000? That seems like a ripoff, I thought, but I knew that damages and compensation could add up quickly. I didn't notice a single injury on my eldest son or his wife. It didn't seem like the accident was that serious. Perhaps the other party involved held a special position, but still, paying such a large sum didn't make sense. Why was it so expensive? The other person was driving a luxury car, and the repair costs are quite high, my son explained. But shouldn't insurance cover the repairs? I asked. We didn't have insurance, so we have to bear the full costs ourselves. We're in serious trouble if we can't pay this amount. Can you help us out? With that, my son and his wife bowed their heads to me, a gesture I'd never seen from them before. They must be truly desperate. I sighed. I guess I have no choice. We're family, after all, and I should help my family in trouble. Reluctantly, I agreed. Okay, I'll arrange the money, but make sure you pay me back. Yes, thank you. Of course we'll repay you, they promised. I prepared the money, considering it a loan. But after that, I heard nothing from my son or his wife. A week passed, and I started to wonder how the situation with the accident had been resolved. Then, when I went shopping for the first time in a while, I reached into my wallet to pay and realized 3 of my credit cards were missing. No way, I thought. I hadn't used this wallet recently, and I hadn't left it anywhere. There were no signs of a break-in at home, and the cash was still there. What was going on? As I panicked, I realized that I hadn't used my wallet or even left the house in the past week. When I hurriedly contacted the credit card company, I was shocked to learn that $50,000 had recently been spent. What's going on? I thought. The only visitors I'd had were my eldest son and his wife. Could they be involved? Feeling uneasy, I immediately called my eldest son. Hello, can you talk right now? I asked. Yeah, sure, Mom, but it's rare to get a call from you, he replied, sounding unusually cheerful. His tone made me wonder if he had been drinking, even though he should have been preoccupied with the accident. The thought that he might be drinking this early infuriated me. What was he thinking? Are you drinking by any chance? I asked, my irritation growing. No, it's not like that. What are you talking about? He responded, sounding defensive. Have you seen my credit cards? They're missing from my wallet. I pressed, hoping I was wrong. Oh, you noticed already? I thought it would take a bit longer for you to find out. I'm surprised you caught on so quickly, he said with a smug tone. What do you mean? I asked, dread washing over me as I began to realize what he was implying. Could it be that my eldest son and his wife had taken my credit cards without permission? It felt like theft, plain and simple. I didn't want to believe it, but after hearing what he said, I couldn't think of any other explanation. There had been no signs of a break-in, so they were the only suspects. But I never expected him to admit it so easily. I was too shocked to respond at first, but my son continued talking. We've just been using a bit of your money. Your credit card is really convenient. You know, we're on vacation for my wife's birthday, staying in a top-tier suite. The whole trip, including the hotel, is costing about $50,000. It's nice not having to worry about money. This couldn't be my son. Someone must be impersonating him over the phone. That's what I desperately wanted to believe. But deep down, I knew it was him, revealing a side of himself I had never seen in over 30 years. Betrayed by my own family, my heart broke, and I was at a loss for words. Why would he do this to me? Was he really my son? Oblivious to my feelings, he seemed to be enjoying himself. You think it's okay to use someone else's credit card without permission? Don't you know the difference between right and wrong? And you haven't even repaid the money from the accident. Why? No report, no repayment, and now you're stealing my cards. It's just unbelievable. The words burst out of me in a wave of emotion. I just wanted him to apologize. One simple word, and maybe I could find it in me to forgive him. But instead of the apology I longed for, I heard his wife's voice on the other end. Mom, you've saved up quite a bit of money, right? So it shouldn't be a problem if we use a little. Money is meant to be spent, not just saved. That's right, my son chimed in. I'm really lucky to have such a smart wife. We're going to enjoy ourselves, so don't contact us anymore. With that, he hung up the phone. A clever daughter-in-law? What does this all mean? Could it be that she's the mastermind behind all of this, manipulating my son? The thought shifted my perspective slightly. But regardless of who initiated it, this was a crime. Using a credit card without permission, even among family, is theft. What were they thinking? Anger surged within me, and it took time to regain my composure. But at least now I had a clear grasp of the situation. I had a plan in mind. After hanging up the phone, I waited about 2 minutes before calling again. This time, my eldest son's wife answered. Hello? Do you need something? I told you we're on vacation. You shouldn't be contacting us. This call is a courtesy, I replied calmly. Her dismissive tone didn't faze me. A courtesy? What are you talking about? She asked, sounding slightly annoyed. I've notified the credit card company about the unauthorized use and had the card stopped. Don't be surprised when it stops working. I informed her, letting my words sink in. You did what? How are we supposed to pay for things now? She demanded, her voice rising in panic. Lending and borrowing credit cards is not allowed, and this is clearly unauthorized use. Did you really think I would just overlook it? That's incredibly naive. What do you mean you stopped the card? We need it. We don't even have tickets for the return flight. Call the credit card company right now and get it reinstated, or we'll be in serious trouble, she insisted, her tone turning desperate. If they truly needed help, they could have asked for it humbly like they did during the last incident. But after seeing their true colors, it was clear that any expectation of decency was futile. I wasn't angry anymore, just astonished by their audacity. I ended the call and immediately blocked their number, along with any messages. I had no desire to speak to them again or even see their faces. No matter how much they begged, I couldn't bring myself to help them this time. Then I contacted my younger son. I warned him, they might cause you some trouble. A week later, my younger son called. Mom, it's about my older brother. I've decided to pay the money for now, so they'll be coming back soon. But I'm worried they might hold a grudge against you. Don't worry, I reassured him. I'll handle it if they come. I knew my eldest son and his wife were likely to blame me, completely ignoring their own actions, but I was ready for whatever came next. I felt guilty about involving my younger son, but I was determined to be even stricter when they returned. With this resolve, I waited for them to come home. The next day, as I had expected, they showed up. Mom, why did you do this? Do you realize how much trouble we were in, stranded abroad without a single acquaintance? Have you ever considered how desperate we felt? They began yelling at me the moment they walked through the door. How foolish, I thought. It became clear to me once again that only fools try to win arguments by raising their voices. If they had just explained their situation logically, maybe I could have understood. But they showed no intention of apologizing. You always just shout like barking dogs. But honestly, I never expected anything different from you, I said calmly. You have two choices. Either call the police yourself or repay the full amount right now. What? Police? What are you talking about? Don't joke with me. You're the one who stopped the credit card and left us in that mess. Shouldn't you be taking responsibility for that? I couldn't help but wonder what kind of upbringing leads to such a lack of understanding. In over 60 years of life, I never thought I'd encounter people like this, but I was serious. Do you realize that using someone else's card without their permission is considered fraud against the credit card company? Even if we're family, sharing cards is not allowed. Reporting this to the police will only cause trouble for you. Wouldn't you rather just repay the full amount? You should be thankful I haven't reported you yet. But we don't have the money right now, you know that, they protested. Oh, and about that story you told me about the traffic accident. I already know it was a lie. I want that money back too. Their reaction was priceless, eyes wide and mouths agape in shock. I couldn't help but laugh inwardly. If they thought I was clueless, they were sorely mistaken. Why are you bringing up the traffic accident now? They stammered, clearly taken aback. Because after what you did with the credit card, it's time you stopped underestimating me, I replied, unwavering. I immediately spoke with my second son. He mentioned how your lifestyle had recently improved and also confirmed that there hadn't been any accidents. Since he lives nearby, he quickly checked and confirmed that the car was perfectly fine. It turns out the whole story was a lie. While it might be difficult to sue my own son, your wife isn't my family, so I can pursue fraud charges against her. Upon hearing this, my eldest son's wife became visibly agitated, avoiding eye contact as if she finally realized the gravity of her actions. But it was too late. What shocked me the most was that there was still no apology from either of them. They just sat there in silence, not uttering a single word of regret. I was amazed at their complete lack of common sense. Anyway, I'm demanding full repayment of the money, I continued. If that's impossible, I won't hesitate to report you to the police. I'll also make arrangements to ensure my savings aren't inherited by you and use this as an opportunity to sever ties. Wait a minute, we're family. Isn't that a bit harsh? They protested. You're adults now, so such childish excuses won't fly, I replied coldly. If I report this to the police, you'll learn about the harshness of reality. Their feeble excuses only infuriated me more. All I wanted was estrangement and repayment of the money. After making this clear, I drove them out of my house. They tried contacting me several times afterward, even coming to the house to apologize, but I was no longer willing to listen. I contacted a lawyer and began the repayment process. Eventually, my eldest son and his wife seemed to come to their senses and promised to repay the money. We're truly sorry and promise to repay the money, but it's difficult to pay $55,000 in one go. Could we perhaps arrange installment payments? There's always the option of taking out a loan, I responded sharply. If you sell the car and get rid of your expensive branded items, you can quickly raise the money. Don't make me angrier. Of course, I had no intention of accepting installment payments, and how they borrowed money was none of my concern. They repeatedly requested installment plans through the lawyer, but I refused. Reluctantly, my son and his wife took out personal loans and for the remaining amount, resorted to loan sharks. They ended up losing almost all their possessions except the car, and his wife had to start working to cover the monthly interest payments. The couple, once living lavishly, was now being tormented by the very money they had once squandered. I don't know how long this situation will last, but it's the result of their own actions. It's too late for regrets. They must live with the consequences of their choices. As for me, I'm living happily, even if alone. Life isn't just about money, it's important to live without being misled by it.
Thrown at me instead of a warm greeting during a family gathering just before my son's wedding was a remark that hit hard. In front of me, a baguette from an upscale French restaurant rested on a glass plate, a symbol of unexpected humiliation served by my son's fiancé. I had raised my son, Christopher, on my own, and never did I imagine such a moment of degradation. As a 55-year-old housewife named So, widowed early in life, I had dedicated myself to nurturing Christopher. This year, he turned 25, graduated from college, and secured a job, becoming the pride of my life. Despite his success, he chose to continue living with me in the house left by his late father. I cherished the idea of spending more time with him. However, my world took an unexpected turn when Christopher revealed he had a girlfriend and intended to marry her. Initially shocked, I soon embraced the news with genuine joy, expressing my happiness at his growth. Christopher, still living with me, promised to bring her home soon, but the opportunity didn't materialize. Curiosity and anticipation built up in me. And when I finally asked about her, Christopher shared some details. Her name was Roy, 4 years older than him, and she worked as a tutor from a family of teachers. The revelation surprised me, and I wondered about their relationship, but I patiently waited to meet her. Time passed, and 2 months went by without a meeting. The absence of Roy started feeling intentional. Fate intervened when, by chance, I overheard a conversation during lunch. Seated back to back with a woman, she complained loudly about her upcoming family meeting before the wedding. Intrigued, I listened as she expressed a deliberate intention to delay meeting the family, wanting to test Christopher's commitment to their relationship and prove he was not a mama's boy. The unexpected encounter left me contemplating the dynamics at play, realizing that fate could be both intriguing and frightening. She said it, and I nearly turned around. Christopher's name echoed in the air, causing a slight dizziness. Her friend's advice to Roy, "You need to be more humble," confirmed the woman loudly discussing her future mother-in-law was none other than Christopher's fiancé. Holding my coffee cup, my hand trembled, and my friend, sensing my distress, asked if I was okay. I mechanically ate the recommended dessert, my mind fixated on escaping that place as quickly as possible. Unaware of my presence, Roy continued her complaints about her fiancé's family. She belittled the concept of a single mother family, comparing it to her supposedly superior educational background. Roy labeled me a clinging mother and spoke about making Christopher abandon me after the wedding. Fear overwhelmed any anger I felt. The conflict between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law had begun prematurely. Even before the family meeting before the wedding, Roy showcased her disdain. Yet, she was the woman Christopher chose. I tried to reassure myself that there must be something wonderful about her. Back home, I attempted to calm my nerves, resolving not to tell Christopher about this incident. Alone, I stopped pushing him about the family meeting. I knew she had no intention of attending, and I refused to continuously be looked down upon by being too accommodating. Christopher sensed my change of heart, but didn't press further. "It's okay if you're busy, whenever it's convenient for you," I told him, trying to ease his burden. The wedding plans between Christopher and Roy seemed to progress faster than the family meeting. Spotting a wedding venue brochure on the living room table, I realized the countdown had begun. I contemplated speaking up about the wrong order of things, but refrained for my son's sake. Making a fuss would lead to accusations of being unable to let go or being a mama's boy, faceless accusations that would upset me. Christopher was crucial to me, but he was an independent adult. I had refrained from interfering more than necessary, demonstrating my tolerance. One morning, Christopher abruptly announced a family meeting with the parents-in-law. They had reserved a fancy French restaurant, and he wanted me to come. The meeting was scheduled in 2 days, a sudden announcement that left me a bit irritated. Shouldn't such things be planned after matching everyone's schedules? I held back my frustration, saying, "All right, I haven't formally met Roy yet, so it's good to meet her sooner." Christopher apologized for the sudden plan, but in my mind, it was Roy and her family who should be apologizing, not him. I reassured him that it's fine. On the day of the family meeting, Christopher and I arrived at the designated upscale French restaurant. I felt a bit nervous, it being my first time at such a fancy place. Christopher chuckled, acknowledging the nerve-wracking atmosphere. As we gave our name to the staff, we were guided to a private room where Roy's family had already gathered. Roy and her mother, Mara, were present. Excusing ourselves, I opened the door to the private room. Seated there were Mara, exuding a definite teacher vibe, and Roy, sporting slightly flashy makeup. Her dress seemed mismatched, likely chosen by Mara for the occasion. Roy and Mara remained silent until I finished my greetings, their scrutiny palpable as if evaluating me as a lesser presence. Christopher, familiar with Mara, greeted her with "long time no see." Mara chuckled, mentioning she had been looking forward to meeting the famous mother, a slight sting in her mention of single mother. Suppressing any reaction, I played it down, emphasizing Christopher's inexperience and suggesting they take care of him. Mara, contentedly nodding, maintained an air of superiority. Her demeanor hinted at how she might treat her students and their parents, an attitude I wouldn't desire for my child. She invited me to sit, yet Roy hadn't greeted me. With reluctance, I initiated conversation, prompting Roy to respond with a mocking snort, deeming repetition inefficient. Her arrogant remark stirred anger within me, but I restrained my temper. She was the woman Christopher had chosen. I feigned calmness, acknowledging her comment with forced civility, though I felt close to my limit. Mara informed us that Roy's father would be late due to work, suggesting we proceed without him. Roy then made a seemingly innocent comment to Christopher, insinuating his lack of exposure to such lavish food due to his past poverty. Christopher, unfazed, went along with her comment. I always knew Christopher to be kind and patient, but this situation seemed beyond that. Concerns about how he navigated society started to creep in. Was he possibly being taken advantage of? A parental worry nagged at me. Ignoring the odd expressions from Roy and Mara, I suggested we enjoy the feast. However, their unpleasant smiles intensified, and the reason behind their mockery soon became apparent. As the first dish arrived on a beautifully decorated plate, I couldn't help but exclaim at the sight of a simple baguette on a glass plate. Roy and Mara seemed to find this hilariously amusing, laughing heartily at my shocked expression. It turned out that the owner of the upscale French restaurant was Mara's brother, and they had collaborated to ridicule me. "The poor that suits you best," Roy said, openly mocking me. Christopher, seemingly pale, and I were left in disbelief, trying to contain my anger. I muttered about how this supposedly suited a poor person like me. Roy misinterpreted my reaction, thinking I was crying. Dismissing it, she laughed even harder. Surprisingly, Mara, who might be expected to scold Roy, only said, "Oh dear, Roy," without any intention of reprimanding her. I couldn't bear the idea of such individuals becoming part of my family. Just as I raised my bowed head, Roy's father entered, apologizing for being late. Witnessing the baguette situation, he seemed taken aback. Roy proudly explained that she had the baguette prepared, thinking I, raised in poverty, hadn't experienced such cuisine. Her father scolded her for taking the joke too far, but couldn't hide his amusement. The thought of them becoming my family was unbearable. As the father turned pale, I looked up and recognized him. Cedric, the principal of a private high school where I had been facing difficulties. I expressed my surprise, and he exclaimed in shock, revealing that he had become the principal 3 years ago. Instead of dwelling on educational policies, I couldn't resist suggesting he pay more attention to education at home, especially considering the insult from his daughter, something I vowed never to forget. I said, staring down at him. He had always berated me, claiming that a single mother couldn't be a principal. He had spread rumors that I couldn't properly educate my own child. Roy, realizing the impact of her actions, seemed taken aback. Marcia trembled, lost for words. I looked at each member of Roy's family and slowly bit into the baguette. The sound of me crunching echoed in the room. Delicious, as expected of a high-end French restaurant's baguette. How about it, Cedric? I'd offered, smiling as I held out the glass plate with the baguette. His hand trembled amusingly as he took it. Don't get the wrong idea. I'd always separate work and personal life. Your dismissal has always been a topic at the board meetings. I was the one opposing it. Without rivalry, there's no momentum for reform. But your role ends here, I declared, giving him a final warning. In fact, I had evidence of him accepting bribes during admissions, manipulating interviews, and enjoying a luxurious life with that money. I was still deciding whether to pursue criminal charges, but if he left the school quietly, I was willing to let it go. Christopher, let's go home. She may be this kind of lady, but can you still see her as a marriage partner? I won't stop you if you choose her, I said to Christopher, whose gaze was fixed on the baguette Cedric held out to him. Roy, with a strange smile, whispered, "You'll marry me, right?" Thinking that marrying him was her only way to save Cedric's position, her pleading eyes turned to him. He looked down, gripping his hands on his knees. The engagement is off. This marriage is as if it never happened, he declared. It's just a joke. I didn't mean to mock you. It's a joke, Christopher. You're so stiff. Roy desperately tried to cover up. If that wasn't mockery, then what was it? I was amazed that she couldn't come up with a better excuse. He looked at Roy with an unexpectedly cold gaze. Roy, you've been given a lot by your parents, education, and love. But I believe I received even more from my mom. Seeing her work was cool. She's still cool, he declared. He could never forgive her for mocking me and expressed pity for the students she was teaching. I wouldn't want to be taught by someone like her. I heard bad rumors about you but chose to believe otherwise. You betrayed that trust, he said, causing tears to stream down Roy's face. She seemed to finally understand the irreversible damage done. Wait. You're joking about the breakup, right? I bragged about getting married to my friends. I can't break it off. It's embarrassing, she pleaded tearfully. What's most necessary for you now is to reflect on how things came to this. We probably won't see each other again, but I hope you grow, I said. As Christopher and I were about to leave the private room, Cedric grabbed his shoulder to stop him. Christopher shook off his hand as if it were something filthy. I've been patient, but let me say this clearly. What's wrong with being raised by a single mother? Did you see Roy's vulgar behavior? Raised by respectable parents. You should be more ashamed, he said firmly. Cedric had no response and looked down in shame. Roy's cries echoed in the private room as we left the restaurant. The moment we stepped outside, we heard Cedric's angry voice, probably yelling at Roy. Christopher, you need to be more discerning in choosing women. When I said that, he scratched his head and mumbled, "It's embarrassing." Apparently, Roy had aggressively pursued him, and Christopher, who tends to be easily swayed, fell into that situation. It was clear that Roy saw an opportunity in him. Regardless, I expressed relief that everything came to light before the marriage as we headed home. The engagement ended amicably. Roy initially demanded compensation, but Christopher dismissed it logically, explaining to his lawyer that Roy was entirely to blame for the broken engagement. The compensation demand was dropped, and when threatened with a lawsuit, Roy quickly backed down. Perhaps her parents advised her not to escalate the situation further. Though I usually keep work and personal life separate, Cedric had to leave the school due to the bribery issue during admissions becoming public. Faced with the choice of leaving quietly or going to court, he opted for the former. Unemployed and desperately seeking a new job, he faced the challenge of overcoming the bad rumors that spread fast in the industry. Roy, having resigned from her tutoring job, was reportedly confined to a room in her parents' house, too embarrassed to even seek new employment. Marcia, burdened with 2 unemployed adults, was allegedly preparing for divorce, yet she couldn't maintain her previous luxurious lifestyle. She wanted to use her earnings solely for herself, citing that as her reason for divorce. A logical decision, perhaps, but one that led to the family's downfall. While I feel a bit sorry for her, I believe it's her responsibility. Sometimes after the incident, I felt genuinely happy for the first time in a while. Christopher introduced me to a wonderful woman, a single mother working at the same place as him. She has a daughter about to turn 3, and it seems she was the one who lifted Christopher's spirits after the broken engagement with Roy. She is bright and sunny, and her daughter is fond of Christopher. Despite the roundabout journey, I am slightly relieved that Christopher seems to be on his way to building a happy family. Maybe, despite the challenges, I'll even become a grandmother.
My name's Harper. I'm 35, thriving in my marketing career, and for a while, I thought I had life all figured out. Then James came along, sweeping me off my feet. Before I knew it, we were walking down the aisle, saying, "I do." Crazy, right? But here's the twist. James came with a 12-year-old son, Tyler. Moving in with them felt like stepping into a minefield. I tried everything to win Tyler over. "Hey buddy, I made your favorite lasagna," I'd say, hoping for a smile. Instead, I'd get an eye roll and a mumbled, "Whatever." It was like talking to a brick wall. One night, I offered to help Tyler with his math homework. "Let's tackle these fractions together," I suggested. He slammed the book shut and snapped, "I don't need your help. You're not my mom." I turned to James, expecting him to step in. He just shrugged. Give him time. But time didn't fix things. Tyler's attitude only worsened. He ignored curfew, left messes everywhere, and constantly talked back. Whenever I tried to set boundaries, James would undercut me. "Harper, don't be so hard on him," he'd say. It was like I was losing my mind. Was I the problem? I needed to vent, so I called my best friend, Olivia. "Girl, you won't believe what Tyler did today," I started. "Spill the tea," she said, and I did. About Tyler's disrespect, James's lack of support, the whole mess. Olivia listened, then said, "Harper, honey, these are some serious red flags. Are you sure you're not in over your head?" "I don't know, Liv. I love James, but this is so rough." "I get it," she said, "but don't lose yourself trying to fix it. You matter too." Her words stuck with me, but I wasn't ready to give up. I threw myself into work, hoping things would smooth out at home. Big mistake. A few weeks later, my boss, Mr. Peterson, called me into his office. "Harper, is everything okay? Your last few presentations have been off." I forced a smile. "Everything's fine, sir. Just a little stressed, but I'll get back on track." But as I left, I knew I wasn't fine. Something had to change. Then the phone rang. It was the school. "This is Miss Thompson, Tyler's teacher. We need you to come in immediately," she said, her tone serious. My stomach dropped. I rushed to the school, my mind racing. Had Tyler gotten into trouble? Was he hurt? When I arrived, Miss Thompson's expression was grim. "Mrs. Walker, Tyler has made a serious accusation against you." "What? What are you talking about?" I asked, my heart pounding. "He claims you've been physically abusing him," she said quietly. The world stopped. "That's impossible. I would never." I felt like I was drowning. Miss Thompson didn't waver. "We take these allegations very seriously. Child Protective Services has been notified." Just then, James burst in. "What's going on?" Miss Thompson explained the situation. I turned to James, desperate for him to defend me. "You know this isn't true, right?" But James looked torn. He turned to Tyler. "Is this true? Did Harper hurt you?" Tyler, avoiding eye contact, nodded. "Last week, she hit me while you were at work." "That never happened," I shouted, losing my composure. A CPS worker arrived soon after. "Mrs. Walker, we'll need you to leave the family home during our investigation." "Leave?" But I didn't do anything. James finally spoke, his voice low. "Maybe it's for the best, Harper, just until we figure this out." It felt like a slap. "You can't seriously believe this." James wouldn't meet my eyes. "I don't know what to believe right now." In a daze, I packed a bag and called Olivia. "Can I stay with you? I'll explain everything when I get there." At her apartment, I broke down. Between sobs, I told her everything. That little brat. Olivia fumed. "And James, how dare he not stand up for you?" "I don't know what to do, Liv. My whole life is falling apart." Olivia hugged me tight. "First things first, we're getting you a lawyer. I know just the person." The next day, we met with Sandra Davis, a sharp-eyed attorney specializing in family law. "This is a serious situation, Harper," Sandra said, "but false accusations do happen. We'll fight this." Back at work, whispers followed me everywhere. "Did you hear Harper beat her stepson?" my colleague Mark asked. I always thought there was something off about her. Later, Mark approached my desk. "Tough break, huh? Kids say the darndest things." "He's lying, Mark. I didn't touch him," I said through gritted teeth. "Hey, I'm just saying, where there's smoke." He trailed off as I stormed away, locking myself in the bathroom. I called Olivia, my voice shaking. "I can't do this, Liv. Everyone thinks I'm a monster." "Listen to me," Olivia said, her voice steady. "You were strong. You were innocent. We'll get through this." As I hung up, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked tired, scared, but there was a spark of determination in my eyes. "I will not let them break me," I whispered to myself. "I will fight this, and I will win." In the following weeks, Sandra and I worked tirelessly to build my case. "We need character witnesses," she explained. "Anyone who can vouch for your relationship with Tyler." I thought hard. Mr. Peterson, he's seen me with Tyler at company picnics. When I called, Mr. Peterson didn't hesitate. "Of course I'll testify. I've seen you with Tyler. You're patient and kind." Tears welled up as I hung up. At least someone believed in me. Sandra also arranged for a psychological evaluation. After several sessions, Dr. Ramirez concluded, "I see no signs of abusive tendencies. In fact, you show a strong desire to nurture and protect." It was a small victory, but I'd take what I could get. Meanwhile, James had gone radio silent. The few times he did reach out, it was all about him. "People are talking, Harper. This is really affecting my business," he said one day. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Your business, James? My entire life is falling apart." He hung up without another word. A few days later, Olivia called, her voice tight with anger. "You won't believe what I just heard." "What now?" I sighed. "I was at Starbucks and overheard James talking to some neighbors. He was badmouthing you, Harper, saying he should have known better than to marry someone he barely knew." The betrayal stung like a physical blow. "He said that after everything I've done for him and Tyler?" "I'm so sorry, honey. You deserve better than this," Olivia said gently. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Miss Thompson, Tyler's teacher, contacted Sandra, requesting an urgent meeting. "I've noticed some inconsistencies in Tyler's story," she explained, looking uncomfortable. "And, well, I did some digging. This isn't the first time Tyler has made false accusations." My heart raced. "What do you mean?" Miss Thompson sighed. "Last year, he accused a teacher of favoritism when he didn't get the lead in the school play. It was investigated and found to be completely fabricated." Sandra leaned forward. "And you're just bringing this up now?" "I feel terrible," Miss Thompson admitted. "I should have looked into this history more thoroughly before escalating things. I'm here to make it right." As the investigation deepened, more truths came to light. Tyler's school counselor revealed a pattern of manipulative behavior, often playing James and me against each other. "Tyler shows signs of severe emotional neglect," the counselor explained. "He creates drama to get attention." It all started making sense: the acting out, the lies, the manipulation. Tyler was crying out for help in the worst way possible. But the most shocking revelation came from Tyler's best friend, Kevin. In a moment of guilt, Kevin confessed to Sandra that Tyler had bragged about his plan. He said he was going to make up stuff about his stepmom so his dad would kick her out, Kevin admitted. He said his dad always believes him and buys him stuff to make up for it. I felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger, pity, and heartbreak. Tyler had been hurting for so long, and James had been too blind to see it. As the truth unraveled, I couldn't help but think back to all the red flags I'd ignored. How James would brush off Tyler's bad behavior, the expensive gifts that appeared after every tantrum. I should have seen it, I told Olivia over coffee. I was so focused on making things work, I missed what was really going on. "You can't blame yourself," Olivia said, squeezing my hand. "You were trying to be a good wife and stepmom." I nodded, a new determination settling in. "You're right. Now it's time to start fighting for myself." The day the case was officially dropped should have felt like a victory, but it was bittersweet. My name was cleared, but the damage was done. I couldn't go back to that house, to James and Tyler. It wasn't home anymore. I met with Sandra to discuss the next steps. "I want a divorce," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Sandra nodded, unsurprised. We'll cite James's lack of support and Tyler's false accusations. It should be straightforward. Straightforward, maybe, but not easy. Every signature on those papers felt like closing a chapter of my life I'd never get back. At work, I threw myself into every project. Mr. Peterson noticed. "Harper, your performance these past few months has been exceptional," he said during my review. "I'm promoting you to Senior Marketing Director." I nearly fell out of my chair. "Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say." He smiled. "There's more. The position is in our New York office. A fresh start, if you want it." I didn't even hesitate. "I'll take it." As I packed up my life, Olivia helped, filling me in on the local gossip. "James is having a rough time," she said. "Lost a bunch of clients when the truth came out. And Tyler, he got suspended for bullying. Guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." I felt a twinge of something, not quite sympathy, but something close. I hoped they got the help they needed. Both of them. New York was everything I needed. A new job, a new apartment, a new me. I even started volunteering at a youth center, mentoring kids from troubled homes. It felt good to use my experiences to help others. 2 years flew by, and one afternoon I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant brought in a letter. The return address made my heart skip. Tyler's old school. Inside was a note from Miss Thompson. "Dear Harper, I hope this letter finds you well. I'm writing to inform you that Tyler has been caught in a serious lie at his new school. He's facing expulsion. James has reached out for help, but I thought you should know. Sincerely, Miss Thompson." I sat back, a whirlwind of emotions hitting me. Part of me wanted to laugh at that irony. Another part itched for the troubled kid I tried so hard to help. "You okay, boss?" my assistant Jen asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I smiled, folding the letter. Just a blast from the past, nothing to worry about. That night, as I got ready for my date with Michael, a kind, understanding man I'd met through my volunteer work, I thought about how far I'd come. 2 years ago, I was fighting to prove my innocence. Now, I was thriving in a job I loved, helping kids who needed it, and dating someone who respected me. As Michael and I walked to dinner, hand in hand, I realized something. I was happy, truly, genuinely happy. "What are you smiling about?" Michael asked, squeezing my hand. I looked up at the New York skyline, my adopted home, just thinking about how sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us to the best places. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Well, I'm glad whatever happened led you here." Me too, I thought. I'd survived, I'd thrived, and I'd found happiness. Meanwhile, those who had wronged me were facing the consequences of their actions. It wasn't about revenge, it was about justice, and the best revenge was living well. As we entered the restaurant, I made a decision. That letter, I wasn't going to respond. That chapter of my life was closed. I had a new story to write, and I couldn't wait to see how it unfolded. The story ends here, but the conversation is just beginning. What would you have done in Harper's shoes? If you received that letter about Tyler 2 years later, would you have responded, offering help despite the pain he caused? Or would you have kept that chapter firmly closed? Your experiences shape your perspective, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop your answer in the comments below. Hi, I'm Jenna. I had just turned 32 when I decided to buy my first house. A quaint little place with a cozy backyard, perfect for my 2 dogs. Buying this house wasn't just a financial step. It was my declaration of independence, my way of claiming control over my own life. The day of the housewarming came with a mix of excitement and nerves. I planned everything meticulously, wanting it to be a blend of fun and formality, a true milestone. My parents were the only family I invited, given the complicated dynamics of extending further. As guests arrived, the afternoon buzzed with laughter and conversation. I was in the middle of showing my college friend Lisa some renovation plans when the doorbell rang again. Expecting a neighbor or a late arriving friend, I opened the door with a smile, only to find my mom standing there with Carson and his daughter, Vanessa. Carson grinned, though it didn't reach his eyes, while Vanessa looked around my living room like she had just walked into a thrift store. "Jenna, darling, Hope you don't mind us bringing a little extra company, my mom chirped, breezing past me without waiting for a response. For a moment, I was too stunned to speak. Mom, I thought it was just going to be us, I finally said, my voice a mix of confusion and irritation. Oh honey, I knew you wouldn't mind. Carson really wanted to see your place and Vanessa's been excited to meet you, she gushed, as if she hadn't ignored my carefully curated guest list. As the party went on, I tried to push down the frustration, thinking maybe it could still be a good day. But I was wrong. I would have chosen a different color here. This shade is so 2010, Vanessa said loudly, eyeing my living room with disdain. My friends, caught in the moment, exchanged awkward glances as the room fell silent. My cheeks burned with a mix of embarrassment and anger. This was supposed to be my celebration, my moment. I couldn't let her ruin it. I turned to Vanessa, forcing a tight smile. Well, not all of us need to follow the latest trends to feel good about our homes. Some of us prefer something more timeless, I replied, sharper than I intended. But it didn't end there. Why would anyone arrange their living room like this? It's almost like she's never heard of interior design, Vanessa quipped. That was it. I couldn't hold back any longer. My friends, clearly uncomfortable, watched as I marched over to Vanessa. The room grew tense. You know, Vanessa, if you have suggestions, I'm all ears. But maybe you could share them without insulting my choices in front of my guests, I said, my voice calm but firm. Vanessa blinked, surprised, then scoffed. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. No need to be so sensitive. Judging by the supportive looks from my friends, they weren't thinking anything of the sort. Despite the awkward tension, I could feel them backing me up. Just as I thought things would cool down, my mom pulled me aside, her face tense with anxiety. Jenna, could we talk in private? She asked softly. In the hallway, away from the party, she dropped the bombshell. Honey, I know it's a lot to ask, but could Vanessa stay with you for a while? Just until they sort out their living situation. Her request hit me like a punch. Mom, I can't. This is my space, and after tonight, it's clear Vanessa and I aren't exactly compatible. Her face fell. Jenna, she's struggling. You know how tough Carson can be on her. It would only be for a little while. I could feel the weight of her expectations pressing down on me, like so many times before when she tried to fix things by putting me in uncomfortable situations. But this was too much. Mom, no, I need to set boundaries. I can't have her stay here, not after how she's behaved. I'm sorry, but that's my final answer. The hurt in her eyes stung, but I knew I had to stand my ground. As she walked away, her shoulders slumped and I felt a strange mix of triumph and dread. I had finally stood up for myself, but I knew this wasn't the end of it. As the party wound down and the last guests left, the house felt quieter, almost eerie. The echoes of laughter were replaced by a stillness that settled heavily in the air. I started cleaning up, the simple task grounding me. Each dish I washed, every crumb I swept, felt like I was trying to clear away not just the physical mess. Debris wasn't the only thing I was trying to clear away. The emotional turmoil that had spilled over throughout the night clung to me. Lying in bed later, with the house dark and still around me, I replayed the evening in my mind. My spine tingled with the apprehension of what was to come. Vanessa's smug smirk, Carson's disapproving glare, my mother's disappointment, they all haunted the edges of my thoughts. As sleep finally claimed me, I clung to the hope that maybe the fallout wouldn't be as bad as I feared. But deep down, I knew better. This was just the beginning, and the repercussions of my refusal would ripple further than I could imagine. The next morning started out ordinarily enough. Coffee, a quick scroll through emails, and a mental to-do list for the day. But that normalcy shattered with a ping from my phone. A security alert from my home system. Panic gripped my chest as I viewed the live feed. Someone was at my house. I rushed home, my mind racing with possibilities. Nothing prepared me for what I found. The locks had been changed. My key was useless against the new mechanism. Peering through the window, my blood boiled as I saw Vanessa lounging on my sofa, a smug smile plastered across her face. What are you doing in my house? I shouted through the door. The door swung open and there stood Carson, grinning wide and unwelcoming. Oh, Jenna, we thought we'd take you up on that offer to stay. After all, he sneered, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. There was no offer, Carson. "Get out of my house now," I snapped, my voice sharp with a command I hoped would cut through his arrogance. Carson leaned lazily against the doorframe, his posture relaxed in stark contrast to the rising anger in my voice. Now, Jenna, let's not be hasty. You wouldn't want to upset your mother, would you? You know how she feels about the police." His words hit their mark. Carson knew exactly how to manipulate the situation. My mother had a deep-rooted fear of the police, stemming from a traumatic incident in her past, and Carson wielded that knowledge like a weapon. But I couldn't let that stop me. This was my home, my sanctuary. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police, Carson. You can't just break into someone's house and change the locks." His smirk faltered, uncertainty flickering across his face as I dialed. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the street. The police arrived swiftly, their questions precise. Carson and Vanessa's attempts to spin the situation fell flat against the legal reality of their actions. "I have every right to secure my property," Carson argued, though his confidence waned under the officer's unimpressed gaze. "The locks were changed without permission, and she was not notified," an officer said, making notes in his book. The law was clear. Carson and Vanessa had no leg to stand on. The eviction was quick. Carson and Vanessa were escorted out, their protests muted by the firm instructions of the police. Watching them leave, I felt a mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that my home was mine again, sorrow for the inevitable fallout this would cause with my mother. As the police wrapped up their report, one officer lingered. "Are you going to be okay?" he asked, his tone kind. I nodded, though my heart was heavy. "Yes, thank you. I didn't have a choice." He offered a sympathetic smile before leaving. Once the door clicked shut behind him, I stood in the quiet aftermath. The house felt larger and emptier, the space that was almost taken from me suddenly overwhelming. I walked through each room, reaffirming my presence in the place that had been violated. The weight of the day pressed down on me, a reminder that the battles were far from over. Carson and Vanessa might be gone, but the repercussions would ripple through my family, possibly irreversibly. Yet despite the turmoil, a stubborn flame of defiance flickered within me. This was my home, and I would fight for it, no matter the cost. The silence of the evening was shattered by the sharp ring of my phone. My heart sank as I saw my mother's name flash on the screen. I braced myself for the inevitable conversation. "Mom," I answered, my voice barely above a whisper. "Jenna," she began, her tone thick with emotion. How could you do this to Carson and Vanessa after everything they've been through?" Her words cut deep. I struggled to keep my voice steady. "Mom, they broke into my house. They changed my locks. What was I supposed to do? Just let them take over my home?" "You could have handled it differently, Jenna. You know how I feel about the police," she replied, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disappointment. "Mom, I didn't have a choice. They left me no choice. This is my home, and I had to protect it," I said, frustration creeping into my tone. There was a long, heavy pause, the weight of her next words hanging between us. "I can't believe this. I thought you understood, Jenna. I thought you cared more about your family." "I do care, Mom," I whispered, "but shouldn't my safety and my rights matter too? Why is it always about what I can do for others, never about what's right for me?" The questions tumbled out, years of suppressed feelings fueling my words. "You just don't get it, do you?" Her voice cracked, laced with a mix of anger and sorrow. "I can't support this. I can't be part of it." My throat tightened. "What are you saying?" I asked, dreading the answer. "I think it's better if we don't talk for a while. I need to think about all this." Her final words cut through the air before she ended the call, leaving behind a silence that felt like a void. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering to the floor. My mother, my lifelong anchor, had cast me adrift over this. I sank into the couch, the soft fabric offering no comfort. Looking out the window, the night stretched on endlessly, and the once comforting contours of my home now felt alien, reshaped by the day's events. Thoughts swirled in my mind, of family loyalty, manipulation, and the personal cost of standing up for myself. Was there another way I could have handled it? A path that wouldn't have led to this rift? As the night drew on, I wrestled with those questions. Manipulation wasn't just about coercion. It was about making someone feel guilty for holding their ground. Carson had used my mother's fears to control me, and now my mother was unintentionally doing the same with her disappointment. By dawn, A quiet resolve had settled over me. Protecting my emotional and psychological space was just as vital as defending my physical one. The rift with my mother was painful, but it was necessary for my growth. Standing in the stillness of the early morning, I knew that while the battle for my home was over, the journey to reclaim my life had just begun. As days turned into weeks, the sting of my mother's words faded into a persistent ache, a constant reminder of the price of my newfound autonomy. Her silence was deafening, but with each passing day, I found pieces of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost in the fray of family obligations. My home, once a battleground of invasion and conflict, began to transform back into the sanctuary I had envisioned. I repainted the living room, erasing the remnants of Vanessa's scornful remarks. With every stroke of the brush, I reclaimed my space. New locks, stronger and more secure, clicked reassuringly under my fingers, symbolizing the boundaries I was learning to set. In the solitude of my reclaimed home, I discovered a resilience I hadn't given myself credit for. Friends and neighbors, aware of the ordeal, rallied around me. Their support soothed the isolation my family's absence had left behind. Dinners, movie nights, and long walks with those who chose to stay by my side filled my days, reminding me that family isn't only about blood, it's about who stands with you when the ground falls away. The fate of Carson and Vanessa became a distant murmur, their paths diverging from mine in the wake of their eviction. Rumors of their struggles occasionally reached me through mutual acquaintances, but they no longer held sway over my emotions. My focus was on rebuilding, on fortifying the life I chose, rather than the one imposed upon me. One crisp morning, as I stood in my garden planting seeds that would one day bloom into vibrant flowers, I realized this was what true independence felt like. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of peace in its aftermath. The estrangement from my mother was a deep scar, one that might never fully heal, but it was also a testament to the lengths I would go to protect my peace. The journey to self-empowerment is often a solitary one, fraught with tough decisions and painful reckonings. But as I looked around the home I fought to protect, I knew it was worth it. Here, in my own space, I was free to live life on my terms, surrounded by those who respected and supported my boundaries. This wasn't just a house, it was my declaration of independence.
"Enough, Susan," my mom shouted, her voice quivering with frustration as she leaned forward, her glare cutting through the tension like a blade. The ornaments on the Christmas tree sparkled faintly under the dim glow of the living room lights, but the festive warmth felt cruelly hollow. I sat frozen, my hands gripping my lap, trying to quell the anger rising inside me. "You always have to make everything about you," my dad added, his tone sharp enough to sting. The words hit harder than I expected, and for a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. My name is Susan Blanchard. I was 32 years old then, and this was Christmas Eve in the late 1970s, a time when families like ours in rural Illinois depended on one another. Our family farm, passed down for generations, was struggling to stay afloat. Years earlier, I'd moved to Chicago to become a lawyer, a choice my parents still saw as a betrayal of our roots. Meanwhile, my older brother Jake stayed behind, running the farm and basking in the glow of our parents' constant praise. I didn't resent him for staying, it was how they treated me that stung. No matter what I did, I was always the outsider. Since summer, I'd quietly sent money to the farm's shared account, hoping to help with the mounting bills Jake had mentioned. He'd asked me to keep it between us, insisting it would hurt our parents' pride if they knew. At the time, it made sense. I trusted Jake to handle it. But now, sitting at the table, listening to our parents heap praise on him for sacrificing so much to save the farm, I felt a deep sense of betrayal. "Jake's the reason we've been able to keep things going," my mom said, her voice thick with pride. "I don't know what we'd do without him." I looked across the room at Jake, expecting some sign of acknowledgement or guilt. Instead, he leaned back in his chair with a smirk, clearly enjoying the spectacle. That was the breaking point. "Actually," I said, my voice shaking but loud enough to pierce the chatter, "I'm the one who's been sending money, every month since July." My dad scoffed, shaking his head as if I'd just said something absurd. "Don't start making things up, Susan. Jake's been here day in and day out, working his tail off for this family. Why would you even say something like that?" The dismissive tone stung more than the words. My mom crossed her arms, her expression cold. Honestly, Susan, it's Christmas. Can we not ruin the evening with your need for attention? Anger and humiliation surged through me. I'm not making it up, I said firmly. I've been depositing money at the Chicago branch of the bank directly into the farm account. Every single deposit came from me. But they weren't listening. My dad waved me off with an exasperated sigh, and my mom turned to Jake, who shrugged, feigning ignorance. The frustration was unbearable. Are you really going to sit there and lie, Jake? I demanded, my voice sharp. You know I've been making those deposits. Jake didn't flinch. He leaned back, his smirk widening. I have no idea what you're talking about, Susan, he said, his tone dripping with false innocence. My blood boiled. Unbelievable, I muttered, shaking my head, but our parents didn't seem to care. My dad sighed heavily, as if I were the one ruining the evening, while my mom cast Jake a sympathetic glance, as though he were the victim. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor, and locked eyes with Jake. You know exactly what I'm talking about, I said, my voice trembling with anger. Those deposits weren't small. You've been letting our parents believe you're some kind of hero, when all you've done is lie. If you don't admit it now, I'll leave first thing tomorrow, I said firmly, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions roiling inside. I'll go back to Chicago and get the proof myself. Jake shrugged, leaning back in his chair with infuriating nonchalance. You're wasting your time, Susan, he said with a chuckle. Whatever story you've cooked up in your head, go ahead and prove it. In that moment, I realized Jake didn't think I'd actually follow through. To him, this was just another family argument that would fizzle out, one where I'd eventually back down, letting him win like always. His smirk said it all. He thought I was too afraid of the fallout to take action. But that smirk only fueled my determination. I wasn't going to let him get away with this, not this time. He'd lied, taken advantage of me, and soaked up our parents' praise while treating my contributions like they didn't exist. I wasn't staying silent. The next morning, I packed my bags, unable to endure another moment in that house. When I told my parents I was leaving, my mom sighed, her voice heavy with disapproval. It's Christmas, Susan, she said, as if I were the one ruining everything. My dad didn't even look up from his coffee. Can't go a single holiday without causing a scene, he muttered. Jake, of course, barely hid his grin, lounging smugly in his chair as though he'd already won. I didn't respond. I wasn't staying, not with everyone acting like I was the problem. I knew the banks were closed, but I didn't care. I needed to get out of there, away from their judgment and his lies. The drive back to Chicago felt endless. The roads were eerily quiet, most people home celebrating with their families. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, the cold winter air seeping into the car, despite the heater working overtime. My thoughts churned, replaying the events of the night before. Jake didn't believe I'd actually do it. He probably thought I'd stew in silence, too intimidated by our parents' blind faith in him to act. But this time was different. I was done being dismissed, done letting him walk all over me. As I passed snow-covered fields and frozen lakes, one thing became certain: I would get the proof, and I would make sure everyone knew the truth. A few days later, when the banks reopened, I went straight to the Chicago branch. The morning was bitterly cold, the kind of cold that stung your skin and made every breath sharp. I stepped inside, the warmth of the bank a welcome relief, and approached the counter. Good morning, the teller greeted me with a polite smile. How can I help you today? I explained, my tone firm but measured, that I needed copies of every deposit I had made to the Blanchard farm account since July. The teller nodded and disappeared into the back. He returned with a thick ledger and a small machine that began printing receipts. One by one, the records emerged, each with my name, the dates, and the amounts clearly listed. When he handed me the stack of receipts, his smile was polite but curious. Here you go, ma'am. Let us know if there's anything else you need. Thank you, I said, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the papers. They weren't just receipts, they were proof, undeniable evidence of Jake's lies. With the stack in hand, I headed back to my car. The roads were still slick from the recent snowstorm, but I didn't care. I needed to get back to the farm. The receipts sat on the passenger seat, neatly stacked and secured under a small paperweight I'd grabbed from my desk. Every time I glanced at them, my anger reignited. Jake really thought he could get away with this, and worse, that our parents had so readily taken his side. The drive back felt longer this time, the farm seeming farther away with every mile. As I passed through quiet towns and frozen landscapes, my mind raced, replaying every dismissive comment, every smug grin Jake had flashed during Christmas Eve. By the time I pulled into the long driveway leading to the farmhouse, adrenaline was coursing through me. My hands trembled as I gripped the wheel, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't leaving until they saw the truth with their own eyes. I walked into the house, the receipts clutched tightly in my hand, the cold from outside still biting at my coat. My mom was in the kitchen, stirring a pot on the stove, while my dad sat at the dining table, the newspaper held in his usual grip. Jake leaned against the counter, casually eating an apple, looking as smug as ever. They all turned to face me as I entered, but I didn't wait for any of them to speak. Instead, I strode to the table and dropped the stack of receipts in front of my dad. "There," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Every deposit I've made to the farm account since July. My name, the dates, the amounts, it's all right there." My dad frowned, setting down his newspaper as he picked up the receipts. He started flipping through them, his brows furrowing deeper with each page. My mom wandered over, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Jake stayed where he was, but I noticed his smirk falter, just for a second. This can't be right," my dad muttered, scanning the pages again. "Why would you do this, Susan?" My mom's lips thinned as she leaned in to see for herself. "Jake said he's been covering everything," she said, her tone laced with confusion and disbelief. I turned to Jake, locking eyes with him. "Well, Jake?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Are you still going to lie about it now?" Jake chuckled, tossing the apple core into the trash with a casual flick of his wrist. "Susan," he said smoothly, "I don't know where you got those, but they're not real. You probably forged them to make me look bad." His calm, mocking tone churned my stomach. I glanced at our parents, expecting, hoping, for a flicker of doubt, but all I saw was their disappointment aimed squarely at me. "Susan," my dad said, his voice low and angry, "what's gotten into you? This is a new low, even for you." My mom grabbed the stack of receipts, holding them like they were contaminated. "Did you think we wouldn't see through this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Jake's been here every day, working to keep this farm alive, and you," she jabbed the receipts toward me, "you come back with some phony papers and expect us to believe it? You've always been so desperate for attention." The tightness in my chest threatened to break me, but I fought to keep the tears at bay. "They're not fake," I said, my voice trembling with controlled anger. "You can call the bank yourself if you don't believe me." But they didn't even consider it. Instead, they stood united in their unwavering defense of Jake. My dad tossed the receipts back onto the table like they were trash. "Enough, Susan," he said, his tone final. I stared at them, stunned by their refusal to even entertain the truth. "I can't believe this," I said, my voice rising as the weight of their disbelief crushed me. "Even with the proof right here in black and white, you still defend him? I've spent months helping keep this farm afloat, and all you've done is give Jake the credit and call me a liar." Jake crossed his arms, leaning against the counter with that infuriating smirk. "Don't be so dramatic, Susan," he said with a shrug. "You've always been jealous. This isn't any different." That was the last straw. "You know what? I'm done," I said, my voice breaking with anger. "Don't expect me to ever come back here. I've had enough." My mom's face tightened, and my dad shook his head in disappointment, as if I were the one in the wrong. Without another word, I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. The cold air hit me like a slap, but it was better than staying in that house another second. By the time I got back to Chicago, I'd made up my mind. No more bending over backward for people who refused to see the truth. The first thing I did after unpacking was call the bank. "No further transfers to that account," I told the teller, my voice steady, despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. It felt strange, like cutting a cord that had tied me to the farm for so long. But it also felt freeing, like I was finally letting go of a burden I never should have carried. At first, I thought I'd feel guilty. I didn't. Every time I thought about Jake's smug face or our parents' blind defense of him, my resolve only strengthened. Let Jake handle the farm. Let him be the hero he pretended to be. I wasn't going to keep throwing money into a place that treated me like an outsider. 6 months passed in silence. Not a phone call, not a letter, nothing. I focused on my work and tried to push the anger and hurt aside. Then, one summer afternoon, there was a knock on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I froze. Standing there were my mom and dad, looking tired and hesitant. My dad cleared his throat. "Can we come in?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. My mom clutched her purse tightly, her lips pressed into a thin line. Part of me wanted to slam the door in their faces. But curiosity won out. I stepped aside and let them in. They sat awkwardly on my couch, glancing around like they didn't know where to start. "What do you want?" I asked finally, leaning against the armrest of a chair with my arms crossed. Whatever they had to say, I wanted it out in the open. My dad stared at the floor, his voice low and hesitant. "Susan, we owe you an apology." "A big one." My mom nodded, her grip on her purse so tight her knuckles were white. "We were wrong," she said softly. "We didn't believe you when you tried to tell us the truth. And we need to make this right." I crossed my arms and leaned back in the chair. "Go on," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. My dad let out a heavy sigh. "After you left, things started falling apart on the farm, bills piled up, equipment broke down, and the crops didn't bring in enough to keep us going. At first, we thought Jake had it handled. He kept saying he'd figure it out, but he didn't, and when we pressed him, he trailed off." Glancing at my mom. Her eyes were brimming with tears as she picked up where he left off. "He confessed, Susan, he admitted it. You were the one making the deposits all those months. You were the reason we stayed afloat." She hesitated, her voice trembling. "We couldn't believe it, not just that he lied, but that we didn't listen to you when you tried to tell us. We're sorry, Susan, truly sorry, for not believing you, for how we treated you, for everything. You didn't deserve any of it." I stared at them. For the first time, I saw something in their faces I hadn't expected, genuine shame. My dad met my gaze, his expression heavy with regret. "We're asking for your forgiveness, Susan," he said quietly. "I know we don't deserve it, but we had to come here and tell you the truth. You saved the farm, and we owe you more than an apology." For a moment, I let their words hang in the air. Part of me wanted to let the silence stretch on forever, to make them sit with their guilt, but instead, I asked, "Where's Jake?" My voice was calm, but anger simmered just beneath the surface. My mom exchanged a nervous glance with my dad before answering. "He's still at the farm. He wanted to come with us, but we thought it was better if we spoke to you alone first." My dad nodded, shifting uncomfortably. "He's been keeping to himself since he admitted everything. I think he knows there's no excuse for what he did. He's ashamed." "Ashamed?" I repeated, letting out a bitter laugh. "That's rich. After months of letting you believe I was a liar? After taking credit for everything I did to keep the farm running?" My dad looked down, his face pale. "You're right," he said softly. "We let it go on far too long. That's on us as much as it is on him. But he wanted us to tell you that he's sorry. He knows he doesn't deserve forgiveness." "Oh, he wanted you to tell me?" I snapped, leaning forward. "Are you serious? You're still protecting him. Even now, he should be here, apologizing to my face. You should have forced him to come." My voice echoed through the small apartment, and I saw the shock on their faces, but I didn't care. I was done tiptoeing around their favoritism. My mom opened her mouth, but I cut her off. "Do you even hear yourselves? He lies, manipulates, and twists everything I did into some heroic story for himself. And now, when it's time to take responsibility, you're still shielding him? What? He's too embarrassed to face me, so you're here cleaning up his mess? Do you realize how insane that sounds?" My dad shifted uncomfortably, gripping his knees. "We thought this would be easier for everyone," he muttered. "Easier for who?" I shot back. "For Jake? For you? Because it sure as hell isn't easier for me." Neither of them had a response. My mom looked down at her hands, nervously twisting the strap of her purse, while my dad stared at the floor, his jaw tight. The silence between us stretched, heavy and suffocating, until finally, my dad stood. "You're right," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "We should have brought him. We should have made him face you. I don't know why we didn't. Maybe because we've been making excuses for him for so long. It's just what we do." My mom followed his lead, clutching her purse to her chest. She looked at me with watery eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're sorry, Susan, you deserved better from all of us." Without waiting for a response, they walked toward the door. My dad opened it, pausing for a moment to glance back at me, his face filled with regret. Then they were gone, the door clicking shut behind them. For a long time, I just sat there, the weight of their shame hanging in the room like a ghost. For the first time in my life, it felt like they finally saw the truth. A week later, there was another knock at my door. When I opened it, my stomach turned. Jake was standing there, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, looking as miserable as I'd ever seen him. "Susan," he said, his voice low and hesitant, "can I come in?" For a moment, I considered slamming the door in his face, but instead, I stepped aside, letting him in without a word. He stood awkwardly in the middle of the living room, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He didn't sit or take off his jacket. Finally, he spoke. "I came to apologize," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "for everything, for lying, for taking credit for the money you sent, for letting Mom and Dad treat you the way they did." His voice cracked, but I stayed silent, waiting. "I don't have an excuse," he continued. "I was jealous of you, Susan. I've always been jealous. You've done so much with your life, and I stayed behind. I thought if I could keep their approval, I'd feel, I don't know, important, but it was wrong, all of it." Jake's voice broke completely, and before I could say anything, he dropped his head into his hands and started to cry, big, heavy sobs that shook his entire body. It wasn't the kind of crying you fake. It was raw, filled with shame. For a moment, I just stood there, unsure of what to say or do. After that day, something shifted. My parents didn't call right away, but when they did, their tone was different. No defensiveness, no excuses. My dad mentioned they'd started handling the farm finances themselves. My mom let it slip that Jake was working to make things right. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. As for Jake, he stayed out of my way after that apology. He didn't try to fix things too quickly, which was fine by me. Trust isn't something you rebuild overnight. But knowing my family finally saw the truth, and the hurt they'd caused, was enough to give me a little peace.
Growing up, it was always clear to me that I stood apart from the rest of my family. My name is Jenny, and I hail from a lineage of restaurant owners. My father, Joe, is a commanding figure, overseeing our family restaurant with a strict hand. My mother, Linda, is his impeccable partner, constantly engrossed in managing the staff. Then there's my older brother, Mike, the golden boy groomed to inherit the family business. I recall a night at the dinner table, the air saturated with the savory scent of Dad's renowned roast. Mom enthusiastically shared details about a new recipe they were experimenting with. "Jenny, you'll love this one. It has that fancy herb you adore." "What's it called again?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "Thyme," I mumbled, idly picking at my food. Mike, mouthful, laughed dismissively from across the table. "Who cares about some dumb herb? Wait till you see the new grill Dad's getting for the restaurant. That's the real deal." Dad nodded, his gaze fixed on me. "Speaking of the restaurant, Jenny, when are you going to start taking an interest?" "You're not getting any younger." Attempting to make myself inconspicuous in my chair, I responded, "When I'm Dad. I like being outside with the plants and stuff." Mom sighed, exchanging a glance with Dad. "Plants? What are you going to do with plants? You need a real job, Jenny, something to fall back on." A knot tightened in my stomach. It was the same conversation every time, but Grandma Rose understood. She lived in a small house surrounded by a breathtaking garden on the outskirts of town. Grandma Rose was different from my parents, gentle and patient. One day, as I found her in the garden, hands immersed in the soil, she smiled brightly. "Jenny, dear, come help me plant these tulips." Sitting beside her, feeling the cool dirt on my hands, I confided, "Grandma, why don't Mom and Dad understand? I love being here with the plants." Grandma Rose wiped her brow, looking at me with wise eyes. Your parents just want what's best for you, Jenny, but they don't see the world the same way we do. There's magic in these plants in the earth. It's okay to be different. I clung to Grandma Rose's words, even as the pressure from my family intensified. High school graduation marked a crossroads. The house buzzed with excitement over Mike's plans to join Dad at the restaurant. Amidst it all, I felt like a spectator in my own life. One evening, as we gathered in the living room, Dad spoke passionately about expanding the restaurant, eyes gleaming with ambition. Mom turned to me, her voice sharp. "And what about you, Jenny? Ready to step up, handle the front desk, learn the ropes?" Taking a deep breath, I mustered the courage to speak my truth. "Actually, I'm not going to work at the restaurant. I'm going to study landscape design." The room fell silent. Dad's face turned red and he barked. "Landscape what now? That's no career for you. You're a part of this family, and the restaurant is our legacy." Mike sneered. "What are you going to do? Plant flowers for a living?" My cheeks burned, but I held my ground. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm good at it, and I love it." Mom's expression wavered between confusion and concern. "Jenny, be sensible. You can't make a living off playing in the dirt." I rose to my feet, a surge of defiance coursing through me. "It's not just playing in the dirt, Mom. It's creating something beautiful, something real. I'm not asking for your approval, but I am telling you, this is my decision." Dad slammed his hand on the table, his voice booming. "If you choose this foolishness, you're on your own. Don't expect any help from us." And not tightened in my stomach, but my voice remained steady. "Fine, I'll do it on my own." Grandma Rose, who had been quietly knitting in the corner, finally spoke. Her voice was calm but carried weight. "Joe, let the girl follow her heart. She's got a gift, and it would be a sin to waste it." Her eyes fixed on Dad. Dad let out a frustrated grunt, turning away. "Fine, do what you want, but don't come crying to us when it all falls apart." I turned to leave the room, my heart pounding. Mike called out after me, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Good luck, gardener. Let's see how far those flowers get you." Stepping into college life felt like diving into deep water, thrilling yet daunting. I, Jenny, was far from the familiar paths of my family's expectations, ready to carve my own way in the world of landscape design. I still remember the buzz of the first day in class, the room swirling with the energy of eager students. I found a spot in the back, trying to shrink into the shadows. That's when Zoe, a girl with fire engine red hair and eyes full of mischief, dropped into the seat next to me. "Hey there, nudie." "I'm Zoe, a first-timer in landscape design." I gave a shy nod. "Yeah, I'm Jenny. It's all a bit overwhelming." Zoe's laugh was loud and genuine. "You'll fit right in. Wait till you get your hands into the real dirt. It's epic. What dragged you into this world?" I hesitated, the disapproval of my family still fresh. "I've always loved plants, the outdoors. It's where I feel right, you know." Her grin widened. "Perfect place for you then." Classes were a whirlwind of learning and creating. I absorbed things like a sponge, from the science of soils to the art of design. I was finally speaking a language I loved. After one particularly intense session, Mr. Davidson, our professor, a man as tall and sturdy as an oak, called me over. "Jenny, your designs, there's something else. You've got a real knack for this." His voice was serious but encouraging. I was stunned. "Really? Thank you, Mr. Davidson. I'm just trying to do my best." He leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "There's potential in you. Don't let it go to waste. Push harder." His words became my mantra. I started to live in the studio, my designs becoming more ambitious, more expressive. It was exhausting but exhilarating. But even in those moments of joy, a part of me yearned for my family. Despite everything, one quiet evening, I gathered the courage to call home. The phone rang, each tone heavy with anticipation. Finally, Mom's voice came through, sharp like a knife's edge. "What? What do you want, Jenny?" Her tone stung, but I pushed on. "I just wanted to check in, see how everyone is." She snorted, her voice dripping with scorn. Oh, now you care, after running off to play in the dirt, abandoning your own family. I gritted my teeth, struggling to maintain a steady voice. I didn't abandon anyone, Mom. I just chose a different path. Her laugh was bitter. A dead-end path, you mean? Don't expect us to be here waiting when it all crumbles around you. The call ended, leaving a sour taste in my mouth. However, it also ignited a fire within me. I dove back into my work with renewed determination, intent on proving not only to my family but to myself that I was on the right path. Life has a way of throwing curveballs, and mine came in the form of a phone call during my final year of college. It was Aunt Clara, my mom's sister, her voice shaky and strained. "Jenny, it's about your Grandma Rose. She passed away last night." Aunt Clara's voice cracked with emotion, and I felt the ground slip away beneath me. Grandma Rose had been my rock, the one person who believed in my dreams. Losing her felt like losing a part of myself. The funeral was a somber affair, my family stiff and formal. Dad, Mom, and Mike looked like strangers to me. After the service, I'd overheard Mom talking to Aunt Clara. "I still can't believe she left that house to Jenny. What's she going to do with it? She can barely take care of herself." Mom's voice dripped with disapproval. I felt a surge of anger but bit my tongue, avoiding a confrontation. The will reading was a few days later. Grandma Rose had left me her house, the beautiful garden haven where I had spent countless hours. My family was shocked, their whispers sharp as thorns. "Why would she leave it to Jenny? She's never around anyway," Mike muttered under his breath. Dad's face was like thunder. "This is ridiculous. That house could have been sold, put money into the restaurant." I stood up, my voice steady but firm. "Grandma knew I loved that house, that garden. It was where we spent so much time together. I'm going to keep it, just as she wanted." Mom's response was cold and harsh. "So you're just going to live there alone, playing in the dirt? What a waste." Their words stung, but I had made up my mind. I moved into Grandma's house, immersing myself in the garden she had loved so dearly. I started renovating the place, pouring my heart into every plant, every flower bed. As the months passed, I transformed Grandma's garden into something truly special. It became my sanctuary, a place where I could be myself away from the judgment and expectations of my family. The day the invitation to Mike's wedding arrived at my doorstep was a day of mixed feelings. It was a fancy piece of paper with golden letters against a white background, representing a part of my life I had left behind. Staring at it, a storm of emotions churned inside me. I decided to go, but on my terms. I dressed in a way that felt true to me, elegant but simple, a far cry from the dirt-stained clothes they remembered. Entering the restaurant, the sights and sounds of my past life engulfed me. I spotted my family across the room, Mom, Dad, and Mike, all decked out, looking like a picture-perfect family. Bracing myself, I walked over. "Jenny, I didn't think you'd accept the invitation." Mom's voice was sharp, cutting through the noise. "I came to see Mike get married. It's a family event, isn't it?" I replied, trying to keep my voice level. Mike glanced at me, his smirk familiar and unwelcome. "What's the matter? Ran out of bushes to trim? Decided to play dress up for a change." I felt a familiar sting, but I brushed it off. "I'm just here to wish well, Mike." It was then that his bride, a tall woman with a haughty look, chimed in. "Oh, this is the infamous gardener sister. Did you manage to scrub the dirt from under your nails, dear, or is it your natural look?" Her words, sharp and mocking, hung in the air. I clenched my jaw, refusing to let her see how deep they cut. "I clean up just fine, thanks for asking." "Congratulations to you both." Dad's eyes were cold, his voice colder. "Your being here doesn't erase the past, Jenny. You chose your path." Their words were like thorns, but I had grown a thick skin. I'm not here to rehash old arguments, just wanted to wish Mike a happy married life. I was quickly ushered to a small table in the corner, away from the family. Sitting there, I could feel the curious stares and hushed whispers. "That's the gardener," they whispered, "the black sheep of the family." But as I sat there, a sense of pride welled up in me. Yes, I was the gardener, the one who had dared to follow her own path. I was no longer the shy, unsure girl they remembered, but a woman who had found her strength, who had bloomed in spite of them. My discomfort only grew as the evening stretched on. Sipping my drink, I tried to make myself invisible. But that plan fell apart when I caught the eye of some guys I knew from childhood. Mike's friends, the same ones who used to join him in mocking me. "Look who's here, the family's little dirt digger," one of them, Jake, sneered as they approached, a smirk plastered on his face. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Actually, it's a landscape designer, but I wouldn't expect you to understand the difference." Their laughter was harsh, grating. "Oh, well, listen to her. Thinks she's all high and mighty now," Chris added with a scoff. I bit back a sharp retort, my hands clenching under the table. I worked hard for my success. My job is more than just playing in the dirt. Their amusement was cut short when an elderly man at the next table interjected. He had been listening, his expression growing increasingly disapproving. "I've seen this young lady's work, the new park downtown. That's hers. It's outstanding, shows what you know." The group was visibly taken aback, their smugness faltering. Muttering under their breath, they slunk away, their egos bruised. Emboldened, I decided to venture out from my safe corner, mingling through the crowd, dodging glances and whispers. That's when I overheard Mike speaking to a group of his friends. "She's always been the odd one, more into her plants than real work," Mike said, his voice laced with a mix of amusement and disdain. His friend laughed loudly. "Every family's got its black sheep, huh?" Their words were like a slap, raw and stinging. I walked away, my heart pounding, reminding myself their opinions didn't define me. As I weaved through the crowd, I bumped into my cousin Lucy, a quiet presence in our loud family. "Hey, Jenny, I've seen some of your designs. They're really something," she said, her voice sincere. I managed a small smile. "Thanks, Lucy. It means a lot, especially today." Lucy looked at me, her eyes understanding. "I never agreed with how they treated you. You're doing amazing things. I'm glad you stuck to your path." Her words were a small comfort amidst the thorns of the evening. We chatted briefly, a momentary respite from the tension. As Lucy drifted away, I returned to my corner, feeling the weight of the evening. The loud music, clinking glasses, and bursts of laughter around me felt like they were happening in a different world. I sat there, sipping my drink, longing for the celebration to end. The wedding night was winding down, its fancy aura overshadowed by my own tangled feelings. Just when I thought the night couldn't get any more surreal, the mayor, a distant relative of Mike's bride, took the stage for his speech. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's a delight to be here," he began, his voice booming across the room. "But tonight, I want to highlight a special guest among us, a true star in the world of landscape design, Jenny." Hearing my name, I nearly choked on my drink. I stood up hesitantly, feeling like a deer caught in headlights. The mayor beamed at me. "Jenny here is the brilliant mind behind the transformation of our city park. She's a celebrated landscape designer who's won multiple awards for her incredible work. Let's give her the recognition she deserves." The room erupted into applause, a sound that felt foreign to me. I glanced at my family's table and saw their faces, a mix of shock and embarrassment. Mike's bride leaned towards him, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Is he talking about your sister, the gardener?" Mike mumbled something, looking like he wished the floor would swallow him up. The mayor's praise continued. "Jenny's work has revitalized our city. She's a true talent." Amidst the clapping, I felt a surge of confidence. The mayor's words were like a light, dispelling the shadows of doubt and scorn from my family. Seizing the moment, I decided to speak up. "Thank you, Mayor, for your kind words. It's an honor to contribute to our city's beauty." I paused, my gaze sweeping over the crowd, settling on my family. It's funny, isn't it? How life turns out. Mike, you and your bride are perfect for each other. Your shared talent for rudeness to others is quite remarkable. The room went silent, the air thick with tension. My parents, my brother, and his fiancée blushed deep red, their shame as visible as if I'd slapped them. Mom's voice cut through the silence, sharp as a knife. Jenny, what are you saying? This is your brother's wedding. I met her gaze unflinching. Just speaking the truth, Mom, something our family seems to struggle with. Mike stood up, his face red with anger. You can't come here and talk to us like that. I held my ground, my voice steady. I've earned my right to speak, Mike. Maybe it's time you all listened. The confrontation ended with Mike sitting down defeated, and the room slowly buzzing back to life. The mayor gave me a nod of respect before moving on. As I sat back down, the weight of the night lifted slightly. I had spoken my piece, stood up for myself in a way I never had before. I was no longer just the gardener or the outcast. I was Jenny, a recognized landscape designer, someone who had grown past her family's narrow expectations. After Mike's wedding, word got out about my success as a landscape designer. People were buzzing about the awards I'd won and the projects I'd aced. It felt like stepping into the sunlight after years in the shadows. And then my family came calling. One afternoon, while I was busy sketching out a new garden design, my phone rang. It was Mom. Her voice had a sweetness to it that felt out of place. Jenny, darling, we've been hearing so much about your work. Your father and I are so proud of you. I raised an eyebrow. Really? That's a change of tune. There was a pause on the line. Well, we were thinking maybe you could come over. We'd love to see you, catch up on things. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. Catch up or catch onto my bank account? I shot back, Mom, that's not fair. We're family. The word family hit a nerve. Family like when you all but disown me for following my dreams. It seems like family matters when there's money in the picture. Before she could respond, I ended the call. I wasn't about to let them back into my life just because they smelled success. A few days later, there was a knock at my door. Mike was standing there, hands in his pockets, looking everywhere but at me. Hey, Jenny, can we talk? He mumbled. I crossed my arms. This should be good. What do you want, Mike? He shifted uncomfortably. Look, I know we haven't been great, but you're doing well. I was wondering if you could, help me out a bit. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Help you out after years of calling me the gardener and laughing at my ambitions? Mike's face reddened. I didn't mean it like that. It's just that things are tough. I cut him off. Save it, Mike. I'm not your ATM. You and the family made it clear how you felt about me. You can't just waltz back into my life when it's convenient. He opened his mouth to argue, but I stopped him. No, Mike. You made your bed. Now lie in it. After he left, I sat in my garden surrounded by the beauty I had created. My phone rang a few more times over the next week, more attempts at reconciliation from my family, but I didn't answer. I was done with their fair weather affection. I had built a life for myself, one that didn't need their validation or their greed. I was thriving in my own right, and that was all that mattered. They had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. As I looked around at the plants and flowers that were a testament to my hard work and passion, I realized I had everything I needed right here. I was happy, successful, and free from the toxic ties that had once bound me. This wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of a whole new book, my book. And I was going to make sure it was a bestseller, written on my own terms, in my own style. The new growth in my life was just starting, and I was ready for whatever came next.
They were like strange creatures I'd never seen before. They congratulated me on marrying my brother. They said my dress was nice, but then one of them suggested that hers looked better. I felt like saying that might hurt the bride's feelings. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. In the room where the bride was getting ready, I was surprised by my sister-in-law and mother-in-law. They made rude comments with a sassy attitude. I couldn't believe how they talked down to me, and my sister-in-law's outfit was outrageous. Her dress was so white it could have been mistaken for a wedding dress, and it showed off her thighs through a slit. She even had fur wrapped around her off-shoulder design. My mother-in-law looked at her daughter with so much love. Meanwhile, my husband looked at them with a cold expression. I never thought I'd experience such bullying on my wedding day. It was too much to handle. Looking back, it's no wonder my sister-in-law's attempts at matchmaking never worked out, considering how she behaved even at someone else's wedding. My name is Anaya. I was born in a coastal town and grew up in a normal family. When I went to a state university, I stayed with my grandma, who lived nearby. Living with her, someone who always cared for me, was my dream. Her cozy old house blended Western and ethnic styles, giving it a nostalgic feel that I adored. Even after finding a job, I chose to stay there, enjoying moments on the balcony, chatting with grandma, and snacking on seasonal fruit. When grandma got sick, I took over caring for the house, hoping she'd recover, but sadly that wish never came true. As grandma's health declined, she moved to a facility in our hometown. I want to look after grandma, I insisted, but she smiled and told me, "You've done more than enough. I want you, Anaya, to find happiness." After grandma passed away, I married Jesse, who had always been there for me. Now we live in a house filled with memories of grandma, but our peaceful newlywed life is often disrupted by two troublesome women. How did someone like you, with such an ordinary face and slim figure, end up marrying my brother? One day, my mother-in-law asked me to make lunch for my sister-in-law, who had a meeting with the neighborhood association. Instead of thanks, my sister-in-law greeted me with sarcasm. I just wanted to leave, but if I did, they'd likely follow me home. Satisfied with her own conclusion, sister-in-law said, "Ask your brother." Well, maybe you two are a good match since he's not that great either. Then she quickly ate the curry I made. I think she believes that eating slowly in front of men makes her more attractive. My sister-in-law might seem mischievous, but what's really scary is her lack of consideration for others. She looks down on everyone, including me and her own brother, without a second thought. It's really tiring. And dealing with her mother, who raised her, is even more challenging. Instead of simply disliking me, my mother-in-law seems more focused on boosting her daughter up by putting me down and giving me orders. That's why she always asks me to do things. If I don't pay attention to her daughter, she'll either keep calling me or show up at my door nonstop. It's like a never-ending nightmare. Mother-in-law always made it clear that her daughter was her top priority and didn't seem to care much about her son, my husband. He insists he wasn't mistreated, but he also says he never felt valued. His father left for a work assignment 10 years ago and never came back, even after retiring. Despite this, he still sends money for their living expenses, so it seems neither mother-in-law nor sister-in-law care much about him. My husband tries to talk to them about their behavior, but they ignore him. To them, he's just another person to look down on. It broke my heart to see my husband suffer more than me, and I often gave in to mother-in-law's demands, which was a mistake. The two of them became increasingly difficult to bear, and as a couple, we grew exhausted. We couldn't continue like this. So determined, my husband and I decided to come up with a plan. Just when we were almost ready, mother-in-law and sister-in-law unexpectedly came to our house. It was a hot summer day, and my husband was at work. With reluctance, I greeted them. "Hello, sister-in-law. What brings you here?" Just because we're your cute sister-in-law and mother-in-law doesn't mean we need a reason to visit. You need to work on that stingy attitude. It's hot outside. Let us in. You're so thoughtless, sister-in-law snapped. I really didn't want to welcome them into Grandma's cherished house, but to avoid making a scene, I reluctantly let them in. I served them coffee and some cookies I had baked the day before. "What? No cake?" Sister-in-law complained. "I'm sorry we came unannounced." "Well, it's fine. Your cooking is all right, even if it's a bit simple," mother-in-law added. "That's true. We'll give you that," sister-in-law agreed. Strangely, their compliments felt more eerie than nice. "The house is old but roomy. It's decent," mother-in-law remarked. "To me, this house is just right," sister-in-law added. "Elle is getting married," mother-in-law suddenly dropped the bombshell. Wait, this self-centered sister-in-law. I was briefly shocked, but her getting married wasn't all that surprising. She often boasted about her shapely figure and her direct approach with men. It seemed to work on gullible men or those seeking casual relationships. "So, is it with the guy you had an affair with?" I remembered a man she had mentioned before. "It wasn't an affair, we just met in the wrong order. It's true love, but no, not him," she brushed off. "The one who recently approached you?" I just noticed his intense gaze and made the first move, but no, not him either. Elle met him at a speed dating event. He's the son of a wealthy man, mother-in-law proudly announced. That's right, I'm having a shotgun wedding with a rich guy. Good for Elle, unlike your brother who married someone like you, she added, taking a jab at me. I'm already pregnant, she continued, driving her point home. The speed dating event was about 3 months ago. She probably charmed an unsuspecting man. I feel sorry for him and his family, mother-in-law commented. Did you end things with the other guys? I asked. Not yet. They all adore me so much, I can't bring myself to break it off. It's bound to happen eventually. Elle is just so charming. But what truly makes Elle happy is money, sister-in-law explained. I had a feeling, but I still wondered if the child was really fathered by that wealthy man. We want to use this house for a pre-wedding family gathering. Their hidden agenda became clear. I was so disgusted that I blurted out my response, absolutely not. They glared at me, and to avoid a confrontation, I quickly tried to smooth things over. I didn't want to make a scene, so I scrambled to find the right words. I think a groom's family would prefer to see their future daughter-in-law's actual home. But our place is a bit messy, and it's just a small apartment. Then tidy up and stop smoking indoors, sister-in-law snapped back. But won't it seem odd if they're invited to the bride's brother's place? I expressed my worry. You're not understanding. We'll just say this is Elle's family home. What if they find out the truth? As long as you and your husband keep quiet, it'll be fine. You're getting married, so pretending just for the introduction won't fix anything. Once we're married, he's mine, and besides, I'm pregnant, sister-in-law asserted. It's not that simple. You're so thoughtful to be concerned. But why not just make this house truly belong to mom and dad? Sister-in-law's absurd suggestions left me speechless. Oh, come on. What a terrible idea. This house belongs to my grandma. It's not just up to me, I objected. Don't you understand? Once you're married, everything belongs to the husband's family. It's a common rule, sister-in-law argued. Well, you better get used to it. What's yours is now ours. So next Sunday, we'll bring the fiancé and his family over. And make sure to prepare a fancy and cute meal, of course. We'll pretend Elle made it and even change the curtains to match Elle's teeth, mother-in-law chimed in. We're relying on you, sister-in-law, they said before leaving, imposing their wishes and convenience on me. All that was left was my boiling anger and a stack of dirty dishes. I'm sorry, we won't let them use it, my husband said that night, his heart heavy after hearing the news. Of course not, but even if we say no, they'll just force their way in. Maybe we should accelerate our plan. I could handle their mistreatment of me, but I won't stand for them disrespecting Grandma's house. We'll make them pay for all the bullying, so be prepared, I declared. The next day, I made several calls. Despite the sudden change of plans, everyone was understanding. I was truly thankful. Once everything was arranged, I called mother-in-law. Mother-in-law, I want to make sure Elle's wedding is perfect. Can we have a bit more time? We're planning to renovate to make it just right for the couple, I proposed. Anaya, I misjudged you. You're truly kind-hearted. But we need to get going with the wedding preparations, so please hurry, she replied. I understand. We'll be ready in 3 weeks. Why don't you start searching for a wedding venue? I suggested. You're very considerate. It's almost surprising. But yes, we'll leave the introduction to you and focus on the wedding, she agreed. Was this our first pleasant conversation and perhaps our last? Those two won't suspect a thing, and they won't set foot in this house until the day of the wedding. Okay, we're going to be really busy starting today, my husband said. We had a very close deadline. We would work really hard without much rest, but it was all for our future. 3 weeks later, the day my mother-in-law had set for meeting us arrived. My husband and I were nervous, waiting for her phone call. I could almost imagine my mother-in-law's angry face as she called. At 10:00 a.m., my phone rang, showing my mother-in-law's name. I answered the call. Anaya, what did you do? My mother-in-law's voice sounded very upset. I thought you'd like it. I made a perfect meal for you and Elle, I replied. What did you do? She asked again, her voice getting louder and more panicked. But her words were hard to understand. The place she brought her fiancé's family to, pretending it was her home, wasn't Grandma's house anymore. I had prepared a new home and meal for them, but it seems they weren't happy about it. Mother-in-law's words were still hard to understand. She probably wanted me to explain everything to the other side. I'll do that. I'm sorry if I made you upset. Can you put me on speaker so the groom's mother can hear? I asked. The shouting stopped and a calm woman's voice came through. Are you Aaron's mother? It seems there's been a mix-up. Oh wait, not Aaron, sorry, she corrected herself. So Aaron finally left his wife for Elle, or is it Ivan Phil? I listed all the men my sister-in-law had been involved with. Anaya, stop it. Mother-in-law screamed, louder than before. The call ended. They were probably in the middle of a big argument. Ah, that felt satisfying. Anaya, my husband, who had listened to the whole conversation, looked at me with apology in his eyes. I'm sorry for making you do that. I should have handled it, he said, sounding regretful. No, remember I said I wanted to get back at them one last time for Grandma's beloved house. Come on, I've explained this. Grandma wanted me to be happy. I love that house, but you're more important to me than it. My mother, Grandma's heir, had planned to demolish the house, turning it into vacant land. It was earthquake resistant, but keeping up an old house is hard. I had been insisting on living there because of my love for it, but after marrying my husband and dealing with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, I changed my mind. I didn't want them to ruin that house. But I didn't want to leave my husband either, so I wanted to say goodbye to Grandma's house with good memories. That's why I asked my husband to find a new job, and we prepared to move back to my hometown. We just sped up our plans. I had Grandma's house demolished and built a small dog house in the middle of the empty land with a tag that says L. It looked like a cozy log cabin, but it cost us a bit more than we planned. I even got some fancy dog food from the pet store. Everything was set. Grandma liked you. She wouldn't want us to break up because of that house, Anaya. I promise I won't waste the chance you've given me, my husband said, looking at me with sincerity. I trusted him when he made that decision. It's been a year and a half since then. After we moved to my hometown, my husband, who was a bit unsure at first about the fishermen in the neighborhood, has become even more popular with them than I am. He seems to really enjoy the coastal town's breeze and all the seafood dishes. His once pale skin now has some color to it. Seeing him happily eating grilled salmon for dinner makes me really happy, I told him. Did you check your emails today? My husband asked. No, nothing new. They're probably busy. We haven't talked to my mother-in-law and sister-in-law since that whole thing happened. My husband's phone is the only way we could reach them, I said. We found out about the doghouse situation from a neighbor who was friends with Grandma. The house my mother-in-law and sister-in-law showed Grandma was torn down, and now there's just a doghouse there. And from the dog food bowl, there's a fancy smell of perfume, I added. The two were really upset, saying it was all because of my brother's wife. When the Fiances family got a hint over the phone about my sister-in-law's bad taste in men, they confronted them. They got really nervous and couldn't give a clear answer. Later, the Fiances' parents hired a detective to check on my sister-in-law's behavior, but they found nothing except lies and a lot of boyfriends. This made them do a DNA test on the unborn baby, and they found out it wasn't the rich man's. So the engagement was called off. The real father of the baby turned out to be one of the men my sister-in-law was seeing. He was happy to have a child with her, and they got married. But his mom was angry that her son was with an older woman she didn't like, so she insisted they all live together. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law was mad that her daughter was taken away, so she rented an apartment near the newlyweds and they fought a lot. My sister-in-law, who wanted to marry rich and have an easy life, now looks tired from dealing with her mother-in-law and doing housework and taking care of the baby. But the good part is, her husband really loves the baby, so they're managing on their own. My husband's phone rings. Oh, it's an invitation for drinks from my father-in-law. Your dad really likes you, I mentioned. I like hearing his stories, and my mother-in-law always makes my favorite food. I see now that my own mom never cared to know what I liked. This is what having a family feels like, my husband whispered. Don't worry, you'll be the kind of parent who knows all their child's favorites, I comforted him. As I said this, I gently rubbed my growing belly and he smiled warmly. I feel like we can make that happen in this house, he said, looking at the caramel-colored beam on the ceiling. It's a special beam we kept from Grandma's house when we tore it down. We put it in our new home as a reminder of Grandma. It was my husband's idea to keep the beam, even when I wanted to start fresh. That's why I chose to build our future with him. Let's make this house just as wonderful as Grandma's, I declared. Yes, definitely, my husband agreed. In this peaceful coastal town where you can hear the waves, our little house stands. This is where we'll create our happiness.
I'm Karen, a 25-year-old employee. And 6 months ago, my grandfather, who raised me, passed away. Today is the day when the lawyer will open my grandfather's will, prompting my visit to his house with my sister Susan. Susan, 4 years older than me, is my only family since our parents passed away in an accident 20 years ago. Raised by our grandparents, we faced the loss of our grandmother to illness a few years ago, and our grandfather's health had been declining ever since. Concerned for him, I chose to live in an apartment near his house, regularly checking on him. "You're a grown woman. It's unbecoming to keep coming back home," my grandfather would say cheerfully. But despite his words, I continued my visits. One day, arriving as usual, I discovered my grandfather in pain at the entrance. In a panic, I called an ambulance, but he passed away suddenly. "Hey, what are you daydreaming for? At least prepare some tea," my sister Susan's voice brought me back to reality. "Right, the lawyer will be here soon," I replied, heading to the kitchen. Glancing at Susan stretching out her legs on the mat and yawning, I could still smell her strong perfume from a distance. "She's the same as always," I murmured as I placed the kettle on the stove. My sister had always been self-centered, dyeing her hair in her teens and hanging out with delinquents. She demanded money without working, causing trouble that our grandparents had to apologize for, leaving me to deal with the fallout as the quiet one. Even as an adult with no stable job, she drifted around, working part-time. I knew she had been asking our grandfather for money in my absence, finding the situation troublesome. If it weren't for the inheritance, I thought, interrupted by Susan's formal greeting to the arriving lawyer. "Ah, you must be the lawyer. Thanks for coming today," she said in her high-pitched voice. Rushing to join them, I thanked the lawyer for his presence, recalling his kind eyes that mirrored my grandfather's. The lawyer's badge gleamed brightly on his chest as we began the process after offering incense in front of my grandfather's portrait. He took a sip of the tea, marking the beginning of a significant and uncertain chapter in our lives. I retrieved my grandfather's will, a document entrusted to him while he was still alive. Its contents revealed that my elder sister Susan was to inherit $20 million in cash, while I, the younger daughter, would inherit the house and the land it stood on. Upon hearing this, Susan burst into laughter, finding it amusing that she was to receive a substantial sum while I, the younger and supposedly plainer sister, would only inherit an old house. "It's just right for someone as plain as you," she remarked snidely. I retorted, pointing out that it wasn't just the house but also the land. She dismissed the value of the land in such a seemingly undesirable location, expressing a preference for cash. I couldn't deny feeling a bit shocked, acknowledging that perhaps my grandfather wanted me to protect his cherished house and land, where he spent his life with my grandmother. "Wow, a house and land. That's pretty awesome, isn't it, Brian?" my boyfriend exclaimed in surprise upon hearing my story. Shaking my head, I implied that it wasn't as great as it sounded, given that my sister inherited $20 million in cash. "More impressive, I'd say," I remarked, feeling a sense of emptiness as I verbalized it. Trying to be modest, I continued, even though I was trying to be modest. "Beautiful and having money, now she's the more, the better," Brian remarked insensitively. Earning a side glance from me, realizing his mistake, he jokingly added, "Your comfort means more to me than money." Brian had been my boyfriend since I started working, and we met at a social event. Although he hadn't proposed yet, I had been considering marriage, and today was our first date in the wild. I ended up sharing details about my inheritance with Brian, thinking he might become my husband someday. Little did I know that I would come to regret this. A few days later, as I visited the family home I had inherited, I planned to clean and sort out my grandfather's belongings. The property was large, but the house was modest. Contemplating the idea of moving in and living here leisurely with a cat, I considered the absence of rent payments, despite potential maintenance costs for deterioration. I had been working hard and saving, so it shouldn't be a problem. Someday, maybe with Brian. Feeling embarrassed at the thought, I shook my head vigorously and rolled up my sleeves to begin cleaning. Just then, I received a call, and my sister's name appeared on my smartphone screen. "Sis, what's up?" "Hey, Karen, having fun all by yourself in that old house?" My sister slurred, clearly intoxicated. She always had a unique way of extending her words, but today it was particularly bad. "Since you're drinking, aren't you?" "It's still afternoon," I pointed out with a sigh, to which she exaggeratedly sighed back. "Oh, you're such a Miss Goody Two-Shoes." "I was thinking about moving here eventually," I answered my sister's question, hoping to end the conversation quickly. "Really? I'm enjoying a suite in a luxury hotel right now." My sister raised her voice, sounding somewhat exaggerated. "Guess who I'm with right now?" "I have no idea," I replied, finding the situation rather boring. "It's that kind of attitude that'll make Brian dislike you," my sister quipped. "What? I'm sorry, Karen." I was flabbergasted when Brian's voice suddenly took over the line. The sudden intervention of Brian threw me off balance, and dizzying question marks popped up in my head. I resented my imagination at this point. A disgusting scenario had been completed in my head. Surprised, "Huh?" My sister's mean-spirited voice chimed in. "Ever since you introduced him to me, I thought Brian was quite a catch." She went on to boast about how she had been attracted to Brian since I introduced him, how she knew where he worked because of me, and how she had approached him as soon as he left work. He came along readily when she asked, telling her that she was hundreds of times more attractive than me. I listened in stunned silence, unable to utter a word. "Karen, I'm really sorry," Brian's voice came again. "Tell me it's a mistake." I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. As a man, I had to take this opportunity. "I do feel bad about it, but come on, it's impossible to resist a beautiful woman who has $20 million, right?" The way he spoke, as if asking me to understand, drained my emotions away, and I felt a cold sensation, like my blood was being drained from me. "You know what? I don't need a man like you," I finally said, and I could hear my sister laughing uproariously in the background. The voice on the phone changed back to my sister. "Well, that's how it is, and from now on, let's not consider ourselves sisters, okay? I wouldn't want you turning to me just because you're broke," she added before abruptly ending the call. Overwhelmed by emotions that had lied behind, all I could do was cry. It had been 5 years since that fateful call as I sat with a cat in my lap, dozing off in front of my laptop. The cat also peacefully slept. It was my day off, but there was still some work left from where I brought home. "Oh no, this won't get the work done," I thought to myself, feeling guilty. But I had to gently move the cat off my lap. Just as I reached out to my laptop, my phone started to ring. An unfamiliar number was displayed on my smartphone. Thinking it could be work-related, I answered the call without any suspicion. "Hello, Karen, long time no see." I instantly knew who it was and froze. The distinctive way of speaking was unmistakably my sister's. "It's you, Karen, isn't it? I can tell just from your initial hello. After all, I'm your big sister." 5 years had passed, which should make Susan 34 years old. A smirk formed at the corner of my mouth at her unchanging way of talking. "You're just the same. By the way, I came home, and there's a hotel standing. Did you sell a house? That's none of your business." "Oh, come on. It's quite a grand hotel, huh? You must have made a good chunk of change, huh?" Getting fed up, I was about to end the call when she started to chatter about her current situation. According to Susan, she had blown through the inheritance in about 2 years, and now she even had a considerable amount of debt. Even Brian, who she's still hanging around, seemed to be drowning in debt. I was speechless. Honestly, I couldn't care less. "So, lend me some money," Susan requested, yelling. But I answered calmly, "I've always wondered why Grandpa distributed his estate that way. But on the day you took Brian from me and cut ties, I understood." I started talking slowly, reminiscing about 5 years ago when Brian broke up with me, leaving me crushed. After crying my heart out, I sat dazed in my room, staring into space. "I'm such a fool," I murmured, and large tears began to spill again. My gaze fell on a painting I had made as a child and had gifted to my grandfather. He had framed it and kept it hanging lovingly. Rising unsteadily, I picked up the painting. "Grandpa." As I continued, my emotions swelled, and I started to cry. I recalled the notes my grandfather and I used to exchange on the back of that painting, like a family journal. Knowing that I was to inherit the house, he probably figured. I found this note. "I'm glad I noticed," I said, shuddering at the thought that I might have left it unnoticed. I reached for a sheet of notepaper that had fallen from the back of the frame, with the note addressed to me. The date on the letter was just before my grandfather passed. "I knew you'd definitely notice this letter. Right now, you're probably wondering why I distributed my estate in such a manner," I read aloud. "Cash to you, a sister, and an old house and land for you. It may seem like I favored Susan, but that's not the case," the letter revealed, finally answering the question that had been bothering me. "Despite any claims of favoritism, I wanted to leave most of my estate to you, bouqueted for me till the end." I finally understood what had been bothering me, and I continued to read the letter. But Susan would not be satisfied with a regular division. This child, even as her grandfather, I must admit, she's terribly greedy. "Exactly, Grandpa," I whispered in agreement, though he couldn't hear me. "She even took my boyfriend from me. That's what I want to tell him in my heart. That's why I arranged it this way," I read. "While Susan may appear to have received the better deal at first glance, she won't pay attention to your share. According to Grandfather's letter, the value of this land in our area is continuously increasing due to ongoing urban development. As of the time I'm writing this, it's not worth Susan's $20 million yet, but the value of this land will surely increase in the future." As I read this far, my eyes widened in surprise. You can live here if you're attached to it, or you can sell it when its value rises enough to make a good profit. "All I want is for you to be happy," Grandfather's letter had said. When I finished conveying the content of the letter, Susan clicked her tongue and said, "Hag." "I lived in that house for a while, but when my marriage was settled, I decided to sell the house. Just like Grandfather's letter said, the land value had risen enough. Anyway, I'm never lending you money," Susan declared. But as if she had a good idea, she added, "Right. If you want, I can give Brian back to you. So help your sister. It's a good deal, right?" At this moment, something inside me snapped. Enough was enough. You've been taken care of by my grandpa, and yet you haven't shown a hint of gratitude. I despise you for that, and you're not my sister anymore. Besides, I'm already married. I don't need Brian, and I don't even want to see his face. Stay out of my life for good." I said what I needed to say and hung up. I quickly set up call blocking, and my cat on my lap was cowering on the bed. I quickly picked up my cat and said, "I'm sorry." After that, it seems Susan contacted Brian, and they both stormed into our old house. Did they try to return Brian to me? There's a respectable end there now, but they must have misunderstood something and were shouting that they were my relatives. Even though I just sold the land and had nothing to do with it, it's simple for those two. I sold the land, and an inn was built equals I must be the owner of the inn. Of course, the staff reported to the police. The two of them were arrested because they had destroyed several items in the inn. Furthermore, it was discovered that they had been committing marriage fraud for money in the past. It seems they'll be sent to prison together. I was also questioned by the police, but I was able to prove that I had no involvement. Quickly, as we were estranged, I was released. As my husband, who came to pick me up, and I were walking through the station, we heard screaming and turned our gaze. There were Susan and Brian, who looked completely different. Fortunately, they didn't notice us. Both of them had messy hair, worn-out clothes, and looked nothing like the two people I remember. Especially Susan, who never skipped her makeup and fashion, looked even more different. They were probably being moved to a different location. As I watched the two of them, filled with a sense of melancholy, my husband and I locked eyes. I grabbed the hand he extended, and we left the police station. "Are you okay?" My husband, always concerned, looked at me with gentle eyes. "I'm okay. I have you and this little one." I touched my fairly noticeable belly and smiled back. In my belly, a new member of our family is growing. Money is important, but there's something even more valuable. That's what I want to teach our child, with my husband by my side.
The day I went to my future in-laws' house for the first time to introduce myself as their future daughter-in-law, I was incredibly nervous. As soon as I stepped inside the entrance, I was greeted by my future sister-in-law, Melissa. At first, she was all smiles, saying, "Nice to meet you," with a sweet demeanor. However, the moment my future husband, Adam, left the room, her attitude shifted drastically. "You should just leave," she coldly spat, splashing water at me. I was so shocked by her behavior that I couldn't say a word. My future in-laws, who were right there, said nothing. All they managed was a weak, "Oh, well, let's not make a fuss." Feeling humiliated, I stood up to deal with my soaking wet clothes, completely lost. Just then, the front door opened, and Melissa's husband, Ken, arrived, slightly late. "Hi, nice to meet you." I introduced myself weakly, pretending nothing had happened, but Ken looked surprised. "Wait a minute." At that moment, Melissa's face turned pale, her demeanor shifted, and the entire atmosphere changed. "My name is Lisa, and I'm 30 years old. Adam and I were introduced by mutual friends, and now we live a quiet life together. Though we haven't been blessed with children, I feel happy every day." My journey with Adam began several years ago. After graduating from vocational school, I worked in housekeeping services. I've always loved cooking and cleaning, and I'm proud to have helped so many families through my work. For example, I regularly assisted busy working couples by cleaning and preparing dinner, providing them with a relaxing home environment when they returned. For families with small children, I tidied their living spaces, giving overwhelmed parents a chance to breathe. And for elderly individuals living alone, I helped with daily shopping and meal preparation, ensuring they could maintain a safe and comfortable lifestyle. Through these experiences, I found deep fulfillment in improving the quality of life for others. One family I'll never forget was the Thompsons. One day, I received a call from the company I worked for about a new assignment, a large, luxurious home owned by a wealthy couple. When I arrived, I was struck by the spacious yard and grand gate. However, parts of the house seemed neglected. "Hello, I'm Lisa. I'll be helping out from today," I greeted them. The husband, Mark Thompson, welcomed me warmly. "I'm Mark, and this is my wife, Amy. Thank you for coming. This house is far too big for us to handle on our own, so we're grateful for your help." Amy, though looking a bit tired, gave me a kind smile. I began by touring the house, deciding where to start. From the large living room windows, I noticed the garden. Though it needed care, it was home to beautiful flowers Amy had nurtured. "These flowers are lovely," I commented. "Thank you," she replied softly. "I've been taking care of them for years." I started cleaning, polishing windows, dusting furniture, and organizing their home. Mark and Amy often watched me work, occasionally chatting with me. "You're so skilled for someone so young. How did you get into this line of work?" Mark asked. "I've always loved cooking and cleaning since I was a child," I explained. "I wanted a career where I could help others." Mark nodded in approval, looking pleased. Over time, we grew closer. Between tasks, we would sit for tea and share stories. One day, Amy showed me their family photo album. "What a lovely family. Is this your son?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "He works for a big company and travels all over the world, so he doesn't come home often. Right now, I think he's in, well, I forget which country." Though they spoke proudly of their son's success, a hint of sadness lingered. "It sounds like you're very proud of him." "We are," Mark said, "but we miss him a lot. When he comes home, it's the highlight of our year." Their longing for their son touched me deeply. I found myself wishing for his return, too. One day, Mark asked for a special favor. "Lisa, could you help me with something? Today is Amy's birthday. Honored, I prepared a special meal for her 77th birthday, complete with her favorite Japanese dishes and a homemade cake. When I served it, Amy's eyes welled with tears. This is the most wonderful birthday I've had in years. Thank you so much, Lisa," she said, her words deeply moving me. But time is relentless. One day, when I arrived at the Thompson house, I noticed a black ribbon on the front door. A terrible sense of dread washed over me as Amy greeted me with red, tear-streaked eyes. "I'm sorry I didn't contact you, Lisa, but Mark passed away yesterday," she said, her voice breaking. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. Mark, who always greeted me with a warm smile, was gone. A painful tightness gripped my chest. From that day on, Amy's demeanor changed. She stopped tending to her beloved garden, and the once vibrant flowers began to wither. She would sit on the sofa, staring blankly, lost in grief. I tried everything to cheer her up, but the void in her heart remained. Even the meals I prepared would go untouched. "Lisa, I think it's time for me to prepare for my own departure," she said one day, her voice heavy with sorrow. Hearing her words, I couldn't hold back my tears. Every day, I searched for ways to lift her spirits. I took her on walks around the neighborhood, and with her son's permission, I even arranged small day trips for Amy to help lift her spirits. "Ever since you started visiting, my days have been so much brighter," she said one afternoon, her voice filled with gratitude. "I don't feel as lonely anymore. Thank you so much." Her words meant more to me than I could ever express. Just hearing her say thank you made everything worth it. However, only a few days after she shared those heartfelt words, Amy quietly passed away. For a while, I couldn't process the loss. The house, once filled with life and warmth, now felt vast and empty. Without Amy, it was as if all the color had drained away. I buried myself in work, using it as a way to numb the pain. My friends noticed the change in me, especially Emma, my close friend. "Lisa," she said one day, gently but firmly, "there's someone I really think you should meet. He's a great guy, just give it a try." After Amy's death, I hadn't been able to fill the hole in my heart. I went through the motions at work, but my passion was gone. Seeing me like this, Emma invited me to a dinner gathering. That night, for the first time in a long while, I dressed up a little and tried to push through my lingering sadness. When I walked into the restaurant, I saw Emma waving at me from across the room. Sitting next to her was a man I had never met before. "Lisa, come meet Adam," Emma said with a wide smile. "He's a really kind guy, and I think you two will get along great." Adam greeted me with a warm, gentle smile. As the night progressed, my nerves began to settle. During dinner, we talked about our work, hobbies, and families. Eventually, I shared my story about Amy. Before I realized it, I was crying. "I'm so sorry for bringing this up," I said, embarrassed. "It's okay," Adam replied, his voice soft and comforting. "Losing someone important is really hard." His warmth and understanding were like a balm to my soul. In that moment, I felt a weight lift off my heart. Adam listened quietly, his steady presence giving me a sense of comfort I hadn't realized I needed. After that night, Adam and I stayed in touch. We began meeting up regularly, grabbing meals, talking during breaks in our schedules, and simply enjoying each other's company. Spending time with Adam gradually filled the void in my heart. One evening, as we sat together at a quiet cafe, I found myself saying, "Adam, I feel so at peace when I'm with you. I want to be with you forever." Adam looked a little surprised, but then smiled gently. "I feel the same way, Lisa. You make my heart feel at ease. I want us to keep sharing these calm, peaceful days together." Tears filled my eyes, but this time, they were tears of joy. Being with Adam helped me rediscover my smile and my hope for the future. I felt certain that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, I could overcome them with Adam by my side. From that moment on, our days together felt like a dream. Each moment spent with Adam became a treasure. A few years later, we decided to get married. When the day finally came to meet Adam's parents, I was nervous. As we approached their front door, my hands trembled, but Adam gently squeezed my hand. "It's okay, Lisa," he said reassuringly. "My family is really nice." At the entrance, Adam's parents, Ryan and Sarah, greeted us warmly. "Nice to meet you. I'm Lisa," I said, trying to sound confident. "Thank you for having me today." "Hello, welcome. Please come in. We've been looking forward to meeting you," Sarah replied with a smile. "Make yourself at home." The atmosphere was friendly and inviting as they guided us into the living room. Sitting there was Adam's older sister, Melissa. Melissa greeted me with a dazzling smile. She was strikingly beautiful, with long, shiny black hair that gleamed in the sunlight and big, expressive eyes. Her cheerful personality instantly lit up the room. "Hi, I'm Melissa, Adam's sister. Thank you for coming today," she said warmly. "It's an honor to be here," I replied with a smile. At first, Melissa's friendliness put me at ease. We chatted easily about how Adam and I met, and the conversation flowed naturally. "So, how did you and Adam meet?" she asked. "We met through mutual friends," I explained. "From the first time I met him, I was drawn to his kind nature." "Oh, that's lovely to hear. Adam has always been such a kind soul, ever since he was a child. He's still that way, so gentle and caring," Melissa said with a smile. Listening to stories about Adam's childhood made me happy. It was clear he had grown up surrounded by love and warmth. The evening felt perfect until Adam stepped out of the room. "I'll be right back," he said, leaving to use the restroom. The moment he was gone, Melissa's expression changed. Her eyes turned cold, and her friendly smile disappeared. "Why would he be with someone like you?" she sneered. "You're just a maid, after all." I froze, unsure of how to respond. "You don't belong in this family," she continued, her words cutting like knives. "Anyone can do housework. You're just a laborer, nothing more." Her gaze swept over my outfit, and she scoffed. "And that outfit? It looks like something out of the 80s. How embarrassing to stand next to Adam looking like that." Tears stung my eyes, but I couldn't find the words to defend myself. "This is exactly why you'll never be more than just a maid," she said cruelly. Then, without warning, she grabbed a glass of water and threw it at me. The cold water splashed across my face and clothes, soaking me instantly. I gasped, the shock leaving me frozen in place. "Oh no, the floor is wet now," she said mockingly. "Why don't you go clean it up? After all, that's your job, isn't it?" Her mocking laughter echoed through the room. Adam's parents sat silently, their awkward attempts at diffusing the situation amounting to a week. Now, let's not make a fuss." When Adam returned, he immediately noticed the wet floor. "What happened here?" he asked, concerned. I forced a smile, trying to hide my tears. "Oh, it's nothing. I just had a little accident," I said, excusing myself to the kitchen to calm down. As I wiped my face, Adam appeared behind me. "Lisa, are you okay?" he asked softly. "Lisa, what happened?" Adam's voice was filled with concern as he stepped into the kitchen and saw my wet clothes. He grabbed a towel and gently began to dry my hair. Tears welled up in my eyes as I hesitated before answering. "It was Melissa. She threw water on me and she said I'm just a maid. She told me to clean up the mess." Adam's expression darkened immediately. Without hesitation, he strode back into the living room, his voice sharp and filled with anger. "Melissa, what did you do? Why would you treat Lisa like that?" Melissa crossed her arms, feigning innocence. "What? I was just asking her to do her job. Isn't she a housekeeper?" Adam's parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but didn't say a word. They avoided his gaze, their silence a tacit acceptance of Melissa's behavior. "Melissa, that's enough." Adam's voice rose, his frustration evident. "Lisa is not just a maid, she's my partner, and you owe her an apology." Melissa rolled her eyes, her tone dismissive. "Oh, come on, Adam, you're overreacting. Lisa needs to get used to our family dynamics." I stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. I couldn't understand why Adam's parents didn't step in to stop Melissa. That's when I realized Melissa had always been coddled. She was the special child, born prematurely, often sick as a child, and never held accountable for her actions. Their overprotectiveness had turned her into someone who believed she could do no wrong. The door suddenly opened, and a man's footsteps echoed in the hallway. A tall, well-dressed man entered the living room. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his deep voice carrying through the tension. "I just got back from my trip." Melissa's face lit up, her demeanor changing instantly. "Ken, you're home." The man, who I quickly realized was Melissa's husband, smiled warmly. "Hi, everyone, I'm Ken." Then his gaze shifted to me, and his smile faded into one of recognition. "Wait, are you Lisa?" I nodded, confused. "Yes, I'm Lisa. Nice to meet you." Ken's face brightened. "I can't believe it. My parents used to talk about you all the time. You helped my mom so much after my dad passed. She always said you were like family to her." Tears sprang to my eyes at his kind words. "I'm glad I could be there for her." Ken turned to Melissa, his expression now serious. "Melissa, what's going on? Why is Lisa soaking wet? Melissa's face went pale. She stammered, I didn't mean to. Ken's gaze hardened. You didn't mean to? Melissa, this is unacceptable. Lisa was a blessing to my family. She deserves respect, not whatever this is. I'm sorry, Melissa muttered, her voice shaky. That's not good enough. Ken snapped. You need to take responsibility for your actions. This behavior isn't okay. Melissa burst into tears. I don't know why I acted that way, she admitted. I felt jealous. Lisa's worked so hard for everything she has, and I've always been taken care of. I felt useless and small compared to her, and I lashed out. I'm sorry, Lisa. Her confession left the room in stunned silence. For the first time, Melissa's vulnerability shone through her polished exterior. Melissa, I said softly, thank you for apologizing. I hope this is the start of something better for you. Ken let out a sigh. Melissa, none of that excuses what you did, but I'm glad you're starting to see things clearly. You need to make real changes. Melissa nodded, wiping her tears. I will, I promise. The atmosphere was heavy as Adam gently took my hand. Let's go, Lisa, we've had enough for today. As we left, Adam squeezed my hand tightly. I'm so sorry, Lisa, I never thought Melissa would act like that. It's okay, Adam, she has her own struggles to deal with. I just hope she grows from this. The drive home was quiet but comforting. We knew we would face any challenges together, no matter what. In the months that followed, Melissa's life took an unexpected turn. Her marriage to Ken unraveled as trust between them broke completely. They eventually decided to separate. Without Ken or her parents' constant support, Melissa faced the harsh reality of living on her own for the first time. She struggled but slowly began to grow. She got a job, learned to manage her finances, and discovered the strength she never knew she had. One day, months later, I ran into Melissa at a coffee shop. She looked different, still confident, but with a newfound humility. Lisa, she said softly, it's been a while. It has. How are you? She hesitated. I'm doing better. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, and I want to say I'm truly sorry. I was wrong to treat you that way. Her sincerity surprised me. I can see you're working on yourself. Melissa, that's what matters. Melissa smiled, a small, genuine smile. Thank you. As for Ken, he moved on, focusing on his career and personal growth. Meanwhile, Adam and I continued building our life together. Despite everything, our bond only grew stronger. I'm proud of you, Lisa, Adam said one evening. Why? Because you stayed true to yourself. You're the strongest person I know. His words filled my heart with warmth. No matter what challenges came our way, I knew we could face them together, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace.
Oh, I had assumed that Mom had a ton of. I told you I had money saved up, didn't I? Her out by now. What's the use of allowing the unemployed parasite to remain here? Since moving here 3 months ago, my savings were washed out by my son and his spouse. I was done with them treating me like a mate. With everything, so I quickly and silently went. I was phoned by my son. Mom, what's up? Tony seemed desperate when he spoke on the phone. Then something I had done had turned into headlines from around the country. My name is Sarah, and I'm 70 years old. Been residing in France for a while. However, things got worse with my heel, so I returned to my native United States. Unit was vacant, so I contacted to see if I might help my son and his wife remain with them temporarily. Tony, my only 44-year-old lone son, works in an office employee. Neither he nor his spouse Alice do have children, and they appear to depart silently. While I was away, we lost contact, but I opted to get back in touch, and Tony appeared to happy to hear from me. I have described my situation and requested permission to remain for. Tony hesitantly admitted after a while that it was uncomfortable to force upon them, yet the joint. Seeing my family again brought me more joy than my hesitations, laced with a hint of anxiety. And joy, I rode in a taxi from the airport to their residence upon my arrival. Alice and Tony welcomed me to the Tony appeared content as Alice made her arrival. Was clearly upset. and I intend to stay here. For some months, my possessions will be delivered later. With my carry-on luggage, I headed to the living room. We spoke about our everyday lives and employment in addition to my most recent French life. Tony inquired as to why I had relocated to. I mentioned earlier that I'm getting older in France. Wish to take in the French countryside scenery. Tummy chuckled, but Alice didn't change. Then we spoke about my health problems. Experiencing extreme lightheadedness, and was the minor's illness can be the cause of a seizure happens. Folks might not be able to stand as a result of the surroundings being spinning and possibly experiencing nausea. Felt uneasy being by myself, thus I desired to remain with them till my circumstances stabilizes. Following a discussion, I had returned to the entryway to retrieve my items from my carry-on. While I was arranging my belongings in the hallway, overheard Alice and Tony talking. Are you really going to let Sarah go, Tony? Staying puts me against living with an elderly. Come on, woman, you are too, she's my mom. Part-time, so you won't necessarily certainly be present. But what about our days? I want to know how long she plans to stay off. Her gone, don't speak that way, Mother will. When you finally depart, we can talk about money. Just keep it quiet tomorrow. She might hear you, but she's too elderly to listen to us. Bring keen ears to detect slights. And their IEES dropped out of the discussion in, I apologize for imposing in the chilly hallway. Tommy and his spouse, so all of a sudden Yes, it's a major hassle for them. However, you should know that I'm pretty content right now. Chatting with Tony and his spouse. Following the years spent apart, when Tony was small, I was a single mother raising him. Following the death of my husband, Tony experienced his fair share of hardships. Coping with disease and everything isn't making up for it. But I was hoping to attend here to express my thanks and regrets. I came to this residence for that reason. It's a regret that I'm not welcome, but they have to live their own lives. Therefore, I visited that I tried to relax into the guest room they gave me. Next morning, Tony departed from my troubled heart. For work, and Alice and I were alone. As I was working on some crafts on the sofa, Alice was in the living room in front of me. Hey Sarah, please stop creating such a mess. Glancing around, I saw remnants of cloth and haphazardly placed threads. I'm sorry. Do you know what this is that I cleaned it up? I showed her the little bag I was making. On it, I had a small green turtle design. This is a turtle-themed purse. I adore turtles. I create small crabs with a turtle motif. Even features a zipper on its exterior. That's good, but Sarah, just relax. During the day, Alice interrupted me. Clearly bored inside, looking very much at. When I'm off, at least go somewhere else. You're obstructing me from my part-time work. But if I go outside too, I get lightheaded. Much, I'll take you to the adjacent community center to remain there throughout the day, and I have household responsibilities. Without allowing for further discussion, Alice stated, he kept on helping out with the responsibilities. You'll not be reading while you're here. The least you can do given that we're permitting you to stay, do some instead of crafts. Laundry and cleaning eventually astounded me. Murmured, all right, and then gently stood up. From then on, I completed all day. Even though I was woozy and hurt, I took on the housework. Tony and Alice handled me. Alice appeared more like a housekeeper. Addicted to social media all the time. It appeared from her phone that she hadn't been completing the housework before I. Did you bring your mother with you that night? Upon Tony's arrival at home, his banking card spoke to me with a smile that I don't. Although you live with us, living is expensive. Could you add something? I glanced over at Tony. I nodded at my reading glasses and got up. Took my handmade banking card out, pouch, and gave it to Tony, who he examined. Quickly, his expression stiffened as he waited. Mom, have you saved anything else but this? Accounts are all I have. They are unnecessary. A great deal at my age, no chronic diseases, or whatever I stated while grinning as the talk went on, and Tony's expression. This is not enough money, darkish man. Not even 10,000, as you claim to be alive. Huge overseas. So I thought Tony maintained asking persistently whether I had any more money. So I said no, and he sighed. Shrugged his shoulders. Okay, I'll wait. For the time being, I'm giving you a kindly allow you to reside here, since this is the very least that you could do following my bank account password was taken by Tony, and debit cards, departing from the space that as I lay in bed at night, I could hear Tony tooting through the dividing wall. Our rooms, what a disappointment. Completely believed that Mom was wealthy. Actually, the household is losing money. I should not have allowed her to stay and see me. Told you to get rid of her already. Unemployed moocher does not benefit us. Regardless of how the two of them seemed, sure I couldn't hear people speaking openly in the adjacent room, or perhaps they desired me. I was listening to them in my chilly bed, keeping back lonely tears and sadness the following day due to Alice's day off. She took me to the neighborhood center. I unzipped my duffel bag to keep up my maintenance in the living room, but discovered I was no longer in the necessary cloth at home, so I was hesitant, but I was unable to beg Alice to return and retrieve. Thankfully, my discomfort was under control today. I was familiar with this region, so I opted to stroll home in order to obtain when the fabric did arrive. I looked via the veranda into Alice's home, and an unknown male were present at. I initially believed him to be a guest, but they appeared very close, so I hesitated. Ate outside for a little before returning without going into the residence, which is why they want my departure, so that I wouldn't reopen the affair. While in the community center, my thoughts kept concerning Alice and those men and chose to call someone for guidance going forward. Refrained from discussing the men and kept communicating with Tony and his wife. But every time I went out of the house residence, I would boldly display a crimson turtle pouch on the brink of existence. Room side table after 3 months. Ever since I moved in with Tony's. By now, my family had become the homes built during my time there. I had a ton of things to perform at home, and when Alice was at home, so I was put in the community center. The majority of my savings had tired of Tony, a man with age addicted to gambling and spent the most of his spare time to play the lotto, and slots seemed to be his obsession with money. Originated from the financial difficulties he's suffering as a child. I first made an attempt to act, but ultimately obtained. Bringing it up always made him 3 months later, I was at my breaking point. Before a lengthy weekend one evening, I chose to bring a piece of equipment I had been taking Tony Alice into consideration. I appreciate that you, Tony, please let me stay with you. I know I made your life difficult when you were. Sorry, I was young and didn't have much money. For all the hassle I've brought about, but I'm with gratitude. I took out a handmade turtle bag from the table. It had a green color and this shell zipper serves as a reminder of, I hope you will both feel my thanks. You'll like to take it in defiance of neither Alice nor Tony had any expectations, expressed any curiosity about my artisanal pouch. Mom, have we really reached our limit? Consider the French account when you have money. I informed you, Tony, that we are out of luck. I put a lot of effort into this. Please accept it as a symbol of my love. Keep in mind how joyful you were when you were little. I used to feel the shell with some chocolates and small cash. Tony begins to become more displeased. I'm not a child anymore. Pleased to get such a thing. Sarah, for how long are you planning to stay? To genuinely swindle us. It annoys us. Tony and his spouse cast me in a chilly light. I frantically begged Tony, do you remember? Joe was the one who helped us in that old. We resided in an apartment that I don't recall to quit bringing up the past. Are we done being silently stunned? I tightened my grip on the turtle pouch and examined the papers feel inside the tomorrow. Tony and his spouse embark on a holiday leaving me behind, as I had anticipated, leaving the house following yesterday's talk, so I hurriedly packed my luggage with the designated courier and dispatched them, going for my French home. I also don't. Do not forget to insert the red turtle pouch. My carry-on bag. I jot down a brief note that thank you and depart from the table. The residence where I had spent 3 months later, I never went back home. Instead, I remained in the United States hotel for a little since I had tasks to complete, and Tony and his spouse seemed to get in touch with me. Eventually, true enough, after roughly 2 weeks, Tony calls Mom later. Let's head to the turtle pouch. Isn't that yours? Tony yells into the phone, hearing his words. You saw that I wasn't shocked when I observed the turtle incident on the news. Bag that I intended to present to Tony and his wife found a $1 check inside. Million was my method of expressing gratitude for all of their actions and to express regret for all the mischief I made when I was younger. Some may consider it superficial to a ton with cash, but I had imagined the day I may gift it to them after modestly storing enough. I did some excavating a little over 40 years ago, prior to finally running into Tony and discovered that he owed money. Attempted to settle bills from gambling with additional gaming only to find himself descending further. He had a reliable employment. I just desired that he pay off his debts, and they were unwilling to go in peace though. Acknowledge my gesture fully, forgotten about their generosity shown to me and my family. Thus I made the decision to split $1 million in checks, modest amounts, and made charitable donations and welfare associations worldwide. America, where I put the gifts, created a turtle bag by hand and delivered it. The turtle pouch became an anonymous sensation, trending and generating headlines. A social media user named Alice. That's the turtle pouch, mommy, mate, right? That implies you intended to give us one. Rich as well, yep. Just that was my means of expressing gratitude to you. And I apologize for creating both the pocket and putting the cash aside to donate to. You could have, in fact, claimed that we would have accepted if you had not wanted to. If you don't need my money, then my sentiments. Tony was either shouting into the phone. Utterly insane, how much is that? Would you dare trick me and return it? Became inattentive and removed the phone away from my ear in a little amount of time, said, all right, relax, you're offering. There's another turtle, and I have a headache. And it's yours if you truly desire it. Tony at last calmed down and restated his craving for the turtle that we decided to meet in a cafe afterwards on the day I went. The final red turtle within a package to Tony and his spouse met where we'd already present and made a money demand prior to my actually sitting down when Tony silently removed the red turtle. Grabbed it right away, unzipping. It's not a check, but rather a little shell. Electrical gadget. What the devil is this? Tony tinkled with the unclear gadget. He discovered a small button, and when Ellie pressed it, a voice started to play. Standing beside Tony right away, Alter Hugh, seated close to Tony Alice's face, altered upon hearing a speech recording. It was Alice's voice, cordially speaking with something about another man who wasn't Tony. This explains why Alice's situation appeared to ultimately understand that it was a video showing her having an affair at. She attempted to steal the recorder at home from Tony's palm, although Tony clung to it. As they struggled, unlocked it. I brought an envelope and spread it out numerous photographs of Alice on the table. Cheating at home on another man provided with unquestionable proof. Alice became agitated and asked Ming why. Why did Tony pick up each picture individually? Analyzing them carefully ever since I arrived at things felt strange about your home. A buddy suggested that I hire a detective to find out and even made the offer to pay for them. What's the issue? And why would you do it? It's sad that you are my son's wife. To believe relatives are lying to one another. When you're older, you'll comprehend. I suppose fate brought me here to learn. Alice, have you been unfaithful to me? I've been with you ever since Tony got your personal secrets. If you're placing the blame for cheating on her, you should fuck off. What about the fact that I have never cheated? Tony, your debt fell silent, And it's now. When it was Alice's turn to talk, how about you? Throwing away all of your cash on gambling. Just make use of the funds you and I have. Your part-time work, thus you ought to. Some cash while taking in their squabble. This pair had managed to get their eyesight, to maintain its unity up until this point. Neither of Tony. Do you have any money? You have $40,000. Dead Alice, you've dedicated all of your profits to your partner in affairs that I had. The investigator also looks into your financial situation. Tony and Alice were both taken aback, and they started yelling at one another, and I was stunned when I initially heard the inquiry findings show that this pair was on the verge of bankruptcy. But we can make it. Return the money if we get Mum's funds. Now give it to us. I've given all that's left is this red money. Turtle statue, which he destroyed in my recall what happened to savings and gambling. You're not serious about all that in range. Tony sprang across the table at me. Other clients began to focus. And the employees rushed past the $1 million is mine. It was intended for me to give it back quickly. The cops needed to be summoned to hold Tony until the police spoke some common reason to him. They graciously took me back to my hotel because of my worries regarding Tony's combative conduct. 1 week later, Tony and Annalie. The partnership has declined. Repair as a result of their financial situation. Obtained. Tony, a divorced man, is now even more single. Engrossed in gaming a scene more than he was discovered attempting to steal company. Funds he was spared from prosecution, but was let go, which worsened his anger at the cafe was recorded on producing a video and sharing it on social media. He has trouble finding another work. Unable to take the disgrace, Tony disconnected every interaction and vanished following Alice's divorce, moved into an ancient house with no one to rely on, living alone in a public housing unit. Prior to my being able to donate to the turtle rescue is visible in my blog post. Ridiculing my own turtle became widely known. Alice began to experience intimidation and sexting. It ultimately extended to her part-time. Even the man she worked with and got her fired was involved in an affair and became weary of her and now departed without a paycheck. She is receiving temporary support for dependent. Following that, I went back to my family's. Once I'd finished unpacking, back home in France, I put on a dress in my apartment. The ease of practice while I was going over certain work pages where I heard a sound. The entrance appeared to be Joe, my roommate. Had arrived back home, Madame President. Hello again, and how was your journey? After a long absence, Joe arrived in America with grinning. He puts down his luggage and coat. Joe, who is 75 years old, lived in the same residential building where my son lives. Tony and I used to live together years ago. Was battling poverty after losing my spouse and taking care of a young Tony, asthmatic. We were without utilities and without anybody to ask for help. I was desperate and thought of giving up on everything. Joe and his spouse were upstairs. Our neighbors were the ones who saved us. Lifelines, give me a ring. I'm back, Sarah. And see, I brought a ton of, wow, all of my faith mementos, thank you. I'll bring a few to the storytelling gathering. Joe, see you tomorrow at the community center? Looked over each of the accumulated mementos. His happy expression on the table after we, having regained our footing, Joe and his, years after the wife moved away for employment, we encountered one another in the city, and I started assisting with a program of support for the poor, on whom Joe had established. Joe's wife had already died by then, so we began collaborating as a company life partners. I have been in charge of this structure after Joe left a few years ago. Years back, what was once a tiny Joe and M's venture has developed into an extensive international organization. In the last 30 years, we've been concentrating on assisting lone mods in racing a few years before moving to France. Passed to examine their advanced assistance systems, even though we gain a lot of recognition. In France, our reach is still limited. Acknowledged in America, I intend to grow. our plans there shortly and desire to invest time in Tony's family as only a mother before they learned about my work. In the end, I was unable to obtain them to comprehend my feelings, but that's their decision, even if it was just temporary. I was content to act as if for a family even though I'm 70 years old today. Even at 70, I still have a lot of wants, and I have to strengthen my back in order to attire and started considering my worldwide speech in support of. Next day. This year marks my 65th birthday, and I go by the name Aurora Morgan. Currently, I reside with my retired husband, a kind and caring man with whom I've shared a long and supportive companionship. Together, we are blessed with 2 children, Henry and Caleb, both happily married. However, our home has begun showing signs of age, prompting us to contemplate renovation. We decided that if we were to embark on this refurbishment journey, it would be practical to live temporarily with our eldest son, Henry, and his wife. Upon contacting Henry and proposing the idea, he expressed hesitancy over the phone. Apparently, the thought of us cohabiting didn't sit well with him or his wife, Hannah. Despite their reservations, we insisted on including a room for us in the renovation plans. Upon sharing this with Henry over the phone, he was audibly hesitant, expressing concern about the challenges of living together. Hannah, his wife, vehemently opposed the idea. Eventually, we decided to drop the suggestion, acknowledging that it might not be the best arrangement. Following this conversation, I shared the details with my husband, who remained optimistic. Despite our eldest son's reservations, he suggested renovating our home to make it more suitable for our elderly years, creating a barrier-free environment where we could live comfortably, just the 2 of us. Several months later, our home was transformed according to our specifications. It became a barrier-free residence, ensuring our comfort and convenience in our later years. Eventually, we invited both our sons and their wives for a gathering. Skylar, our younger son's considerate wife, arrived first, expressing her appreciation for our cooking and offering her assistance in the kitchen. However, when Henry and Hannah arrived, their attitudes were less than pleasant. They made themselves at home on the sofa, demanding tea as if they were the hosts. Despite their disrespectful behavior, we tried to maintain a peaceful atmosphere. During the meal, Henry, appearing irritated, broached the subject we had gathered to discuss. As he spoke, he dropped a bombshell, a recent lung cancer diagnosis. While Caleb and Skylar were visibly shocked, Henry and Hannah's expressions remained unchanged. As the gravity of the situation sank in, Caleb inquired about the current status of the cancer diagnosis, his voice trembling with concern. The response was delivered calmly, leaving us all to contemplate the challenges that lay ahead in the coming weeks. I faced the harsh reality of being admitted to the hospital, knowing that cancer had already spread throughout my body. The doctors, with somber expressions, delivered the devastating news. I had only 6 months left to live. As Skylar tried to hold back tears, I bit my lower lip. Henry, seemingly detached, remarked about my aging, as if it were happening to someone else. Hannah nonchalantly responded, "Well, you can't beat age, can you? My uncle died suddenly from stomach cancer." Their callous statements infuriated me, and I couldn't help but raise my voice, urging them to stop. Skylar and Caleb attempted to calm the situation, assuring that they would take care of Mom in my absence. As the eldest son and his wife appeared preoccupied with their phones, seemingly indifferent to the gravity of the situation, my spouse, with a calm demeanor, requested our children to look after Aurora in the coming months. Caleb and Skylar reassured us, but the eldest son and his wife barely acknowledged the request. The meeting concluded after lunch, and I walked outside to bid farewell to Caleb and Skylar, as Henry and Hannah had hurriedly departed. Despite the difficult circumstances, Caleb encouraged me to keep going, assuring their continued support. However, there was an unspoken tension between us and the eldest son's family. The following week, I opted for palliative care over surgery and chemotherapy, leading to my admission to the hospice. Caleb and Skylar diligently accompanied me every day, providing transportation and nursing care. Unfortunately, the eldest son and his wife never visited, even as my health deteriorated over 5 months. Fearing for my life, I implored my eldest son and his wife to attend, but their dissatisfaction was apparent. During their brief visit, Henry showed no compassion, avoiding any interaction with me. In less than 10 minutes, they hastily left, citing work commitments. After they departed, I noticed Hannah had forgotten her jacket. As I tried to return it, I overheard their callous conversation in the corridor. Hannah questioned the fate of the inheritance, while Henry grinned at the prospect of financial gain from the house refurbishment. Their focus was on the potential windfall rather than the imminent loss. Unable to bear the heartlessness of their conversation, I returned to the patient room. 2 weeks later, my husband passed away suddenly, leaving behind a family marked by indifference and greed. I wept beside my husband for an extended period, finding solace in Caleb and his wife, Skylar, who were there to console me. With their support, I managed to assume the role of the primary mourner and successfully led the funeral proceedings. After the funeral, when only close relatives remained, Henry couldn't contain himself any longer and spoke up about our father's inheritance. He seemed impatient, asking about his thoughts on the matter immediately. Caleb promptly reprimanded him, but Henry, dismissing the notion of the younger son having a say, insisted on discussing the inheritance right away. Exhausted, I exhaled a sigh and suggested we address the inheritance matter the following week. The eldest son and his wife sneered at the idea but quickly left for the day. The next week, both couples gathered at our house to discuss the inheritance. I made an announcement, stating that our father's inheritance amounted to $20,000. Henry seemed taken aback, and despite my calm explanation, he questioned the figure. I handed him a large envelope containing all the necessary documentation and asked him to review it. The expressions on Henry and Hannah's faces changed dramatically after scanning the documents. As they realized that the inheritance was indeed $20,000, Henry voiced his dissatisfaction, suggesting it was too little. Caleb interjected, proposing they should also obtain the house. I calmly explained that the lack of funds was likely due to the renovations our father diligently undertook to make the house suitable for our old age. I asserted my intention to keep the house and care for it as long as I lived, emphasizing that it was unjust for Henry to try to benefit on his own. Henry looked intense, as if ready to confront me, but Caleb intervened, holding him back. Caleb reminded Henry of our father's concern for me until the end. Despite my offer to divide the inheritance fairly, the eldest son and his wife persisted, suggesting that if they didn't want it, they should hand over their portion to them. Skylar and Caleb, however, expressed their intention to give up their inheritance, asking me to appreciate their contribution. The eldest son and his wife interrupted again, insisting that I should hand over their portion. I firmly rejected the idea, explaining that it was not going to happen. They showed no concern for my fixed income and difficulties, expressing their eagerness to accept the money. In response, Caleb reprimanded them, calling them scumbags and urging them to respect their elderly parents. Despite Caleb's admonitions, the eldest son and his wife remained unapologetic, implying that the elderly should keep to themselves and attend only weddings and funerals. It was a bitter moment, leaving a sour taste in the air. I lowered my head and clenched my fists, absorbing the hurtful remarks. Not only did they desire my husband's absence, but they also complained about the inheritance. To add insult to injury, they referred to me as a parasite. I couldn't fathom where I had gone wrong in raising them. Tears welled up, but I composed myself and addressed Henry and the others calmly. "I've heard what you're saying. Let's take a break for a moment," I said, keeping my emotions in check. The eldest son and his wife looked momentarily surprised, but their expressions quickly turned smug. "Is that so? That's even better than we could have hoped for. We no longer have to deal with the old lady. Lucky us, they sneered as they attempted to leave. While Henry and Hannah were making their escape, they made a snide comment to Caleb and his wife, implying that the responsibility of looking after the elderly lady now fell on them. Caleb and his wife rushed to my side as Henry and Hannah stormed away. They reassured me, offering their support and encouragement. As the months passed, I found myself at home, relaxing, when unexpectedly, Henry and Hannah visited, accompanied by Caleb. Confused, I wondered why they were back after we seemingly cut ties. They demanded to be let in, shouting at the door. Caleb apologized, and I allowed them into the house. In the living room, the eldest son and his wife started yelling, questioning why I had handed over the house without considering them. I calmly explained that Caleb expressed his desire to keep the house, preserving his father's memories. The eldest son and his wife appeared surprised, and I clarified that Caleb and Skylar had been immensely supportive. Henry, still bewildered, asked for clarification. I glanced at the eldest son's wife, who seemed ready to explode, and explained that I had decided to hand over the house because Caleb and Skylar had shown dedication and assistance. Expressing gratitude, I smiled warmly at Caleb and Skylar, thanking them for their unwavering support. The eldest son and his wife, dissatisfied, argued that I had promised to take over the residence on my own. I addressed them calmly, offering an explanation for my decision while maintaining my composure. I considered giving it to you if you could respect both your father's and my wishes. Additionally, I've started receiving rental revenue. To the surprised eldest son, I sighed and explained gently, "Remember last year when my father, your grandfather, passed away? Caleb attended the funeral, but you claimed you couldn't because you were too far away. Well, your grandfather was a landlord with various properties and apartments. I finally received my inheritance and started earning rental income." The eldest son and his wife were thunderstruck. "No one informed us about this," they exclaimed. I calmly continued, "I've been earning roughly $2 million every year. It's simple to offer my son and his wife a home." The eldest son and his wife abruptly stood up, insisting that if it's about this, they should care as well. "Why should I give assets to someone who called me a parasite?" I asserted emphatically. "You're the ones who told me not to interfere with your life, right? So there you have it. Please don't leech off of me if you're going to label me a parasite." The eldest son and his wife appeared at a loss for words as I pointed to the door. "Isn't it true that our conversation is over? Please excuse yourself," I asserted. The eldest son pleaded, but I refused, urging them to leave. "Please pay attention to what I'm saying," he implored, grabbing my arm. I stared at him coldly, denying any excuse for him to call me mom. "Can you also offer us a house or money?" "We have a problem," begged the eldest son's wife loudly. I looked at them both and responded, "Are you in trouble? What exactly do you mean?" The eldest son spoke tentatively, admitting they spent recklessly, expecting their dad's fortune and accumulating debt. I yanked the eldest son's arm away and scolded him. "Unbelievable. I never expected you to do something so dumb. You sow the seeds with your own deeds, so deal with the consequences." "Mom, that is simply excessive." I addressed their frustrated faces and announced, "I'll begin transferring assets to Caleb through lifelong contributions from now on. I'm not going to pay you a single cent because I've severed relations with you. Please do not bother me again." Caleb stood up, supporting his promise that they should leave. The eldest son and his wife left, seemingly deflated. Caleb massaged my back as I recovered my breath. Subsequently, the eldest son and his wife allegedly borrowed more money, leading to bankruptcy. Their future seems bleak, with disputes in their flat at night. As for me, I handed over the house to Caleb and purchased an assisted living apartment nearby. Caleb and his wife visit frequently, and a cute grandson was recently born. Moving forward, I aim to treasure each day while cultivating a positive relationship with my second true family. That is my future strategy.